the poorest of the poor get a tax break is exactly what we need to do. So I'm here to adamantly ask you to support Madam Delegate JPC on House Bill 142, More Local Tax Relief for Working Families Act of 2023. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Canale.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 142. You have my written testimony, and a lot of things that I would have said have already been said. I will just make a few points. MACo appreciates this bill because it is enabling. So it does provide counties with the flexibility and the proper tools to impose the local income tax with greater equity and fairness if they choose to do so. You've already heard that a bill that we appreciated from a few years ago that did pass was meant to be revenue neutral. That bill was meant to provide tools to ensure that counties could do this while remaining revenue neutral. Unfortunately, most people in Maryland live in counties that are at the maximum rate, so those counties could not provide tax relief to low-income folks without jeopardizing essential funds for schools, public safety, public health, roads, all the critical things that we do each and every day. So again, we appreciate the flexibility in this bill. We'd ask for a favorable report on House Bill 142.
Thank you. And we have County Executive Fitzwater joining us virtually, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to speak on HB 142 and to Delegate Plakovich-Carr for inviting me here today as well. I'm Frederick County Executive Jessica Fitzwater and here to urge the committee for a favorable report on HB 142. Frederick County was the first jurisdiction to use the authority granted in the 2021 legislation to lower taxes from our current 2.96% to 2.75% for our lowest earning residents. And we expect that approximately 80,000 tax filers in Frederick County will benefit from this tax reduction. And this targeted tax relief supports the working families, as has already been mentioned, that are the backbone of all of our jurisdictions, certainly here in Frederick County. Teachers and public servants, retail workers, service industry workers that will benefit. Based on the most recent United Way ALICE report, 40% of Frederick County residents do not meet a survival budget here in Frederick County, and households of color are significantly more likely to earn below that survival budget. Like many other jurisdictions, we've seen these disparities widen in Frederick County during the COVID crisis. So effective and fair tax policy, like what is being presented in this bill, is a crucial tool for local governments to manage the needs of the county while combating disparities and ensuring that all of our residents are more likely to be able to thrive here in our community. HB 142 strengthens this tool by giving counties more flexibility and local control. And for that reason, I'm urging the committee to give a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Delegate Buckle.
Thank you. So, Delegate Plakovich-Carr, I've heard a lot of different sort of rationales behind the bill, and we did this bill, or a version of the sort of the precursor to the bill a few years ago. Is the bill intended to really be revenue neutral? Because the fiscal note talks about we can't predict that, and I see in some of the supporting testimony, I'm old school, I like to get the paper, and a lot of the folks who have put paperwork in saying they support this, certain organizations, MESA and others, say, well, I'm supporting it because it will enable local jurisdictions to raise new funds, to raise additional funds to pay for our priorities. But I heard some of the folks, including my very good friend and former seatmate, sitting right up here, who said, it'll be net neutral. So to me, those two things aren't the same thing. Is it an effort to say, hey, we're raising more money, we're creating more of a tax base, or is it an effort to say we're going to raise the same taxes, we're just going to adjust where we get them for? We're going to get less from the lower income, and we're going to take more from the higher income, but we're going to wind up with the same amount. What's the intent, or how do you see the bill actually working in reality?
So, is it on? Okay. Thank you, Delegate Buckle, for the question. I'll point to the very last provision of the bill on page 3, where it actually talks about having to tie any tax increase above 3.2% to a cut for the lowest bracket. But I'll just point out that under current law for the 11 counties that are at the cap at 3.2%, the only way that they can do tax cuts is through losing revenues. So for those jurisdictions, they don't have a revenue neutral option on the table. For the other jurisdictions, they might. So that language in that provision really is to try to make it even, but we did try to give a little bit of flexibility there. I would think over time that we're going to see just kind of, you might design to be revenue neutral the first year. That may change. You might start gaining money off of it. You might start losing more money off of it in a particular jurisdiction just because of other demographic changes.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. Like, I get that, but it says concurrently reduces the rate applicable. So, you know, the rate obviously becomes a multiplier for how many people you have that fit the rate and what their total aggregate income is. And so you could say, well, I'm going to raise to 3.7 on everyone who's over, just as a sub-question, the 500 and the 600, that's double our 5.75 top cap rate?
That's exactly right.
So you could say, well, we're going to raise 3.7 for those people. It's going to add up to, you know, some of the gentlemen there in front of you are from very wealthy counties, you know, counties that we envy, from Montgomery County and Anne Arundel County, your tax base, your income tax base. You could go up to 3.7 on people who make more than $500,000 or $600,000 a year, and it may add up to millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars of new revenue. Are you going to cut those tens of millions of dollars potentially of taxes from your lower income, or are you just going to say, hey, I cut their rate? It's not really going to add up to tens of millions of dollars of cuts for those people. They're still going to be paying, obviously. So I'm going to have a net positive. I'm raising taxes in the aggregate instead of, you know, reaching this net neutral, just shifting the equities of who's paying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I follow what you're saying. I mean, I think this ultimately comes back to local control, that our local government should be able to make these decisions, these tough decisions for themselves, and to justify it for the taxpayers and the residents of their jurisdiction who elected them to that office.
I mean, in Allegheny County, if we raised it to 3.7 for people who made more than $500,000 or $600,000, there aren't that many of them. I'm not one of them. I'd like to be, but I'm not. There aren't that many of them. It wouldn't have much of an effect at all to do that. And so that's why I ask, like, is it equity? Is it revenue raise? Is it, you know, I'm just a little confused. But I appreciate the response and all of you gentlemen for testifying today. Thank you.
Gentleman and woman. On
Madam
the
Chair,
virtual
would it be okay
screen.
if the county executive added Albert added something to that question?
Yes, go ahead.
You know, my basic goal would be to try to create a more equitable system. But, you know, we're all going into Kerwin, and everybody's justifiably concerned about future costs. And without flexibility on the income side at all, this puts it all on the property tax side, and talk about a lack of equity. And, you know, problem, it's only, that money would only come from property owners. It wouldn't come from, say, people living in $7,000 apartment for rent in Bethesda. I mean, there's a very different demographic. So I would like whatever we do to make sure that how we raise taxes is more equitable across the board, rather than just saying, now I've got to pass an increase in the property tax rate that I know will affect everybody. It would give us flexibility to maintain a level of progressivity that we can't do when we only rely on one tax. And that's where we are right now.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question in terms of potential migration. So we got a briefing a number of years ago from the comptroller. There's a number of extremely high earners in Maryland. They're making over tens of millions of dollars per year. And the behaviors of these individuals has a great impact on how much tax revenue we make at the state and county level. So one of the concerns always with passing statewide is that they might move to an adjacent state. However, this one is county-based, and these folks have, in some cases, a tremendous amount of disposable income, own multiple properties, et cetera. What's to prevent them from just saying, I don't live in Bethesda anymore, I now live in the adjacent county, and I'm going to switch my residency over there. It's 10 miles away, and all of a sudden now I've saved myself potentially tens of thousands of dollars in taxes per year.
Thank you for the question. I mean, the academic research has been pretty extensive on this issue, and it really is a myth that people are moving primarily based off of tax rates. During the Great Recession, I think you were alluding to those studies that somehow Maryland lost all these millionaires. Well, it turned out, no, their assets were worth less. It's not that people had fled Maryland, they were still here. And I think if you look at the list of counties that are at the cap right now that are in the fiscal note, I mean, some of the wealthiest jurisdictions in Maryland Montgomery County, Howard County, we're already at 3.2%. Wealthy people are still choosing to live in those jurisdictions, even though they could move to an adjacent county and get a tax break.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple questions. Again, I'm relatively new about this, so they may seem a little simplistic. And I agree, we may want to check some of the migration data and things like that that have come out of, and where people are moving to, and other states that people are moving to. It's very important for us in Maryland that would like to keep our people here. So I heard flat taxes are bad policy, flat rates are bad policy, they're not working. So I'm like, flat taxes are, fair across the board. It's percentage based, right? So could you just explain why it's not fair?
I'm happy to follow up with you with some Maryland-specific data on this. I mean,
Sure.
Flat taxes just are inherently regressive, because if you look at the full complement of taxes that people are paying, things like sales tax, gas tax, that are consumption-based, lower-income people spend most of their money. They don't have the ability to save because of their low incomes. And so when they are spending their money on things that are getting taxed, a much higher percentage of their income actually gets spent on taxes than people who have higher means. And we can partly offset that through having a progressive income tax system. That's why we do it at the state level and at the federal level. But still, at the end of the day, folks who are in the top 1% in terms of taxes are paying a smaller share of their income overall on taxes. They pay 9% of their income on taxes. Literally every other tax bracket, the rest of the 99% of us pay significantly more than that, up to 11% of our income on taxes. So moving away from the local flat taxes is a good step towards helping to address that.
Okay, I'd love to see your data on that. Thank you.
And I wouldn't say that a flat tax is better or worse. I think it's a question of values. And that if you believe that government does have a role in making a fairer system so that all residents have opportunity, and you see wealth disparities growing, then tax policy is one way to address wealth disparities, a small one.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify some of that. And then there was we will use it judiciously. What does that mean from a policy perspective as far as your tax policy, when you said we will use it judiciously? Your taxpayers may want to know that. I don't know. I don't know what that means.
We have to get reelected.
It's okay. All right, you can feel free to pass on that.
I'll be blunt.
Again, I'm new at this.
There are numerous polls out there that give you a good idea when people think you're spending their tax money wisely. And I know the one thing that people are most nervous about is just the county government wants a tax increase for purposes unknown to be determined later. I think, talking about Kerwin is a really good example, because we will be under enormous pressure to figure out how to do this.
Absolutely.
And residents expect us to have the kind of school systems that Kerwin is striving for us to have. And, if you want to take the longer run, it also produces more taxpayers who will have higher incomes, who will take some of this burden off of everything else. So there's a shift in society as you achieve higher levels of education and skill that's actually tax beneficial. So I think residents understand the connection between supporting schools and doing what we have to do. That's probably why Montgomery County has gone over MOE for decades, because we're very clear about what we know we need to do. I think if I were to go forward and just propose a tax increase because I said the government wanted more money, I would never get it through the council. And I think residents would be really angry, because before they assent to something, they're going to want to know what they're assenting to and what it is you're going to do with the money. So I'm pretty sure we would be focused on projects which have the highest value to the residents, rather than just generically, this is an opportunity to spend more.
And I like how you tied it before too, like the state mandates. And because yes, there's a lot of things that you're given no choice about, and a lot of this is going to fall onto the county. So yeah, you're completely
right. And I would go back
right.
to what I said before. If I don't have any flexibility here,
I
then it's
understand.
going to be strictly property tax, and you don't get more inequitable than that.
I understand.
And I was just going to speak real quick, Delegate Miller. I think also piggybacking on, I guess, the response to Delegate Buckles' questioning and in line with yours, the key here is that, county cannot raise for the highest earners without cutting from the lowest. And I think when we look at, you know, all the data that's out there and the projections associated with the data, knowing that the folks who make the least in all of our jurisdictions are in really economic tough times at this point, and the expectations is they will only be tougher as we continue to see the income gap spread through demographics, as we continue to see data around housing insecurity significantly increase over the past several quarters. We know that now is a time for us to make action and bold action like this. And again, this is not an opportunity, and I use the word net neutral. This is not an opportunity for our county jurisdictions to kind of run to the bank, but this is really an opportunity for us to provide that relief, be it through policy associated with Kerwin, or be it through direct savings associated with this tax break on our lowest earners.
Oh, wow, I didn't, okay.
And if I may, I just wanted to follow up. All of these questions are very valid, and I want to make sure everyone understands all of this is subject to local public hearings, to local input. So all of these questions will be asked if a county chooses to, use this authority. And again, people have the opportunity to come and ask all these questions and talk about these things. But the reality is, counties are facing enormous fiscal obligations, and they're having to make tough decisions. So I think flexibility here makes some sense. We would like to be able to provide that relief on the low end. And again, all subject to local authority. We do believe that counties should have authority over their own revenues. And I think this gives us more authority there and allows us to be more flexible.
Just a quick note with County Executive Fitzwater. I was reading in some of it with the 2.75 for the taxpayers in Frederick County. It was 50,000 for single, and then 100,000 for the joint filers head of household. You mentioned teachers. With Kerwin, the teacher salary minimum will go up to 60,000. So then they would no longer be in that 275 tax rate. They would be in the higher bracket. Am I understanding that correctly?
Currently, the way the legislation was passed last year, and it's going into effect for this filing year this year, that is where we drew the line. We, I believe, have up to I think it's 2 more years to get our starting teacher salary to that Kerwin dictated 60,000. So you would be correct. This would, having more flexibility for Frederick County and all of the counties would also allow us to be very purposeful about where we draw the line on these different potential brackets, and make sure that it works for each jurisdiction. As has already been said, it allows for a local process and allows for more flexibility as things change.
Okay, and I do appreciate judicious use as a Frederick County taxpayer.
I could just add to that. We did the same thing in Anne Arundel, but it's taxable income. Sorry about sitting in your lap, Mark. But it's taxable income. So if your salary is 60,000, that's not all taxable. You have deductions that get you lower than that. But also that even if it was taxable income that you were getting of 60,000, the first 50,000 would still get the tax break. It's only the other 10 that wouldn't.
Are there any other questions for the sponsor or the panel? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, Samantha Zwirling for 2 minutes, please. And then we have one person after you that I will call up for unfavorable.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you all for having me here today. Samantha Zwirling here with the Maryland State Education Association, representing 75,000 educators across the state of Maryland. I wanted to just first clarify that MSEA, while we always are supportive of revenues towards education, we are also in support of fair tax policy. And so things that help take the burden off of working people while still being able to fund our priorities is something that MSCA is very committed to. As many of the county executives and everybody who was here before just said, this is enabling legislation. This allows our counties to continue to fund their priorities like education. You all have had briefings recently around the increase in students identified as in poverty. A 34% increase across the state, 110,000 students around the state. And we want to make sure that not only can the state provide resources for those students, but the counties are able to meet their commitments as well. This committee has made a lot of hard decisions over the past couple of years to fund the blueprint, and recently in the governor's budget, he allocated another $500 million to make sure that the state is meeting its commitment to these students. And we want to make sure that the counties are also able to meet these commitments in a way that allows for relief for folks who are the working people of Maryland. And that includes many of our members who are bus drivers and food service workers, folks who are not eligible for that $60,000 salary as recently mentioned. So for all those reasons, MSCA urges a favorable support on HB 142. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Seeing none. Next, Brian Levine, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Brian Levine, and I work for the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, and we're here today in strong opposition to House Bill 142. This is a tax increase on businesses, and that's our primary concern, that and the effect on the business climate. This bill would harm the perception of Maryland and Montgomery County. I'm just going to stick with Montgomery County, I think, since the county executive was here. As a high tax jurisdiction. And this perception of being a poor place to do business limits our ability to grow economic activity, job creation, and makes it more difficult for companies to locate and expand in Montgomery County and possibly other counties that institute a higher income tax rate. I mean, in general, you know, most chambers, and our chamber included, opposes increasing taxes on businesses, and that's what this bill does. Especially without, and you know, we've advocated for this, we're not the only one, not to increase taxes in a vacuum, but to instead create some sort of commission or a study group to examine the entire tax structure as a whole. But that's just a side note. I mean, this bill proposes a fairly large increase on certain businesses in Montgomery County if Montgomery County was to opt to raise the income tax rate to 3.7%. The vast majority of businesses would be small businesses, and that's the vast majority of our members. And I just want to remind folks on the committee during the 21 session when the bill passed to authorize the graduated income tax rate, they did remove language, not identical language, but language that would allow counties to exceed the 3.2% income tax rate. I just wanted to note that. So we urge legislators to take a similar action during this session and reject this bill. And with that, Madam Chair, we ask for an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the testimony on House Bill 142. Now calling House Bill 84, Delegate Forbes. I'm sorry, 84. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Forbes. I skipped one. I'm sorry. Can you take a step back? Delegate 24. Delegate Schlega, please come on up. It's been a long day already.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know
Thank
there's
you.
a lot of Kathys around. We're a popular name. And I'd also like to invite up with the panel Patrick from Ames, if you're here. He did submit written testimony. He wasn't sure if he could be here. So for the record, I'm Delegate Kathy Schlega, Baltimore County. Really pleased to be here before you today with House Bill 24. Very simple bill. It exempts sales tax on the rental and purchase of musical instruments for students. And so you might ask, you know, where did you come up with this idea, Delegate Schlega? My good friend here next to me, who will testify next, Lily, is a freshman at University of Maryland, and she called me because she plays the cello, which she would have brought here to entertain you, but it's a very large instrument, so she did not. And she had rented the cello for many years, went to purchase it, and she called and said, Kathy, you cannot believe what the sales tax is on this cello. You know, I'm a student. Music is obviously a proven benefit to kids. and adults as well. So would you introduce a bill to exempt the sales tax? And I said, Lily, that sounds like a great idea. So we have the bill before us. And if it's okay, Chairman, I'll turn it over to Lily.
Okay, good afternoon, delegates. My name is Lily Norkitis, and I'm asking for a favorable report of HB 24. Like tens of thousands of students in Maryland, I started playing an instrument in elementary school. I picked the cello, which my mom wasn't totally fond of since it barely fits in the back seat of the car. But over the last 8 years, I mastered my craft, not only picking up a new party trick, but improving coordination, memory, cognitive thinking, confidence, and found a new way to use my time that bettered how I understand emotions. In October, I finally decided to end my rental program and purchase my own cello. Sought out my price range without thinking about the sales tax and was astonished when my bill was an additional $120 because of the tax. I don't come from a financially comfortable household, so this was a setback just to be able to continue doing what I love. Our school system has incorporated music into its curriculum, but it is inaccessible to a lot of families who can't afford the additional $100+ to cover the lump sum or the few extra dollars every month in a rental program. Music is an incredible thing that connects everyone and instills cultural awareness. The first step to ensuring more students continue with music through all of their years of schooling is to eliminate the sales tax on the rentals and purchases of musical instruments for Marylanders like me, because every student deserves the accessibility to play an instrument without the burden of a financial setback. Now, thinking about logistics, many of my friends in music went out of state to buy their instrument to avoid the tax. Passing HB 24 will keep revenue in Maryland and allow our wonderful family-owned music shops to flourish while helping the students of our state. I will have my instrument well after I'm out of school. So I'm not here today personally so that I can save $120 on my next purchase. I'm here for the thousands of students who can't afford an instrument. I'm asking for a favorable report of HB 24 because a favorable report means progress and equal access to a skill that keeps kids out of dangerous activity and engaged in a magnificent craft. Let's reward the children of tomorrow by making music more accessible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Delegate Schlegel, you have someone signed up to testify virtually in favor, so we will call them Rachel McGrain. If she's in the waiting room, we can bring her up. Okay. And Ms. McGrain, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Rachel McGrain. As a musician, a former music teacher, and the current Executive Director of Arts Education in Maryland Schools, AIMS for short, I support HB 24. AIMS is committed to ensuring that all students in the state of Maryland have access to high-quality arts education. We envision a public education system in Maryland that supports, cultivates, nurtures, and uplifts all students' creativity through a robust arts education experience so they can thrive in a healthy society. AIMS supports HB 24 because it will provide greater access to musical instruments for more students. As a student growing up in Howard County Public Schools, I enjoyed ample access to music and arts education that shaped my growth and development. Having access to band in school helped me develop self-confidence, make lifelong friends, and sharpen my critical thinking skills. I saw many of these same benefits in the students I had the honor to teach in Baltimore City. I was fortunate that my family was able to afford to rent me a trumpet starting in 4th grade and then purchase an upgraded model in 8th grade that I still use today. However, the cost of music equipment is high and can be a barrier to all children having access to the incredible benefits that music education has to offer. Reducing this cost by exempting musical instruments from sales and use tax is one small way to reduce this obstacle. If a student today wants to rent a standard trumpet, that costs about $35 a month. That's $2 in sales tax per month, but over the course of the year, it adds up. Instead of sales tax, you could purchase valve oil, tuning slide grease, and a mouthpiece brush to take care of the instrument. Learning an instrument has the potential to change people's lives like it did for mine and like it did for so many of my students. All students deserve that opportunity, and HB 24 will help increase access to music education by lowering the barrier to participate. Removing barriers to students' artistic experience is worth making a reality. Thank you for your hard work making Maryland a better place for the arts and for students. We all benefit when we invest in our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Delegate Schlegel. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for testifying virtually. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 24. Now calling House Bill 84. Delegate Kathy Forbes, I apologize. Come on up, and whenever you are ready. And this must be Henry Bogdan with you.
For the record, I'm Delegate Kathy Forbes, and I'm here for testimony in support of HB 84, the nonprofit interest-free micro bridge loan, also known as NIMBLE, account funding. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of Ways and Means, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you what I know about this NIMBLE account and hope that I can garner your support in fully funding it finally. It was created by legislation that passed 6 years ago, and it has limped along since then. It was initially funding with $187,000, and so it has not really realized its full potential. NIMBLE, this account was created within the Department of Commerce, and it's available to small nonprofits across the state. These nonprofits are largely grant funded, and they're dependent on those grants. NIMBLE is an acronym for Nonprofit Interest-Free Micro Bridge Loan. So if a nonprofit has applied and been approved for either a federal, state, county, or municipal grant, but that grant funding hasn't come in yet, they can turn to the Department of Commerce and apply, and within 2 weeks' time get a loan up to $25,000 interest-free to tie them over until their grant money is received. When they receive their grant money, they return the money back into the NIMBLE fund, and it's available for another nonprofit. So once we get this fund fully funded, it is a one-time allocation. The Department of Commerce has an advertising plan to advertise this to nonprofits, but they've never really used it. Right now, with funding that came in last year and the year before from the budget, it sits at about $462,000. We would hope to get it to $1 million, and that's what the bill before you today would do. With the minimum funding that they've had, they've been able to do 39 loans in the years that it's been in existed, but with full funding, they could do 40 loans in 1 year, at least 40 loans in 1 year. The vast majority of our nonprofits, there are 32,000 of them across the state. 25,000 of them operate on less than $50,000 a year. And I know that you all know a nonprofit in your district that's doing amazing work, largely volunteer-driven, and could benefit from these funds. I apologize that the amendments aren't included, but there are amendments that are drafted. This bill passed through the Senate last year, and those amendments remove the small and minority women-owned business fund provision and just ask the governor to put in an allocation to fully fund this. Once fully funded, NIMBLE will be an invaluable resource for our nonprofits. The passage of HB 84 will mandate that the NIMBLE fund finally reach its full allocation of $1 million so it can be a viable resource for the nonprofits that serve all of our communities. Thank you for your time, and I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Mr. Bogdan?
Thank you. Am I in the bad seat for the mics? I apologize. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Henry Bogdan. I'm the Policy Director for the Maryland Association of Nonprofits. We appreciate your hearing the bill. We appreciate the original creation of the NIMBLE program 6 years ago. I've submitted written testimony. There are serious issues around the state with nonprofits suffering from delayed payments or paperwork to finalize grant agreements being hung up. And this really stresses primarily smaller organizations because they typically don't have cash flow to carry a program. Say if they have a grant of $200,000, they're supposed to bill quarterly. That means they're going to carry the first $50,000 likely for 4 months before they see a paycheck. And most organizations in the state have limited cash reserves. The numbers we believe are fairly accurate are at least half have reserves of 90 days or less, and something like 30 to 35% have cash reserves of 30% or less, 30 days or less. So you can see the problem right away. Today, what happens, organizations, they skimp, they try to stiff somebody, they go to foundations. Private foundation community has supported, used charitable foundation dollars to carry government programs, basically, by supporting organizations that can't get the money. If you're in the Baltimore City delegation, you've probably seen the report from the Able Foundation about the hundreds of organizations who have gone a year or more without receiving funding that they was committed to them for CDBG programs that they have carried out, fronting the money and borrowing the money from other sources. Where the $1 million figure was in the original legislation. Actually, we believe it was the legislative intent. The fiscal note showed on that original bill $1 million one-time cost, but that was the year that we made fund shifting with the BRFA. The funding came out of the small minority women-owned business account, but all of that money was sequestered for 2 or 3 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank you, Delegate Forbes. It triggered my memory. I know we've seen and heard variations of the bill before. Are you suggesting, the NIMBLE program is a great program. It's great to help all these things. The only concern I ever recall people having with it before was taking the money out of SMWOBA, which also has some great programs and things it does with the money. Is what you're suggesting that what you want the bill to do once the amendments are in, it will no longer take the money out of SMWOBA, it'll just mandate $1 million appropriation from the general fund budget?
Right.
Great.
Correct, and whatever came out of SMOBA can be paid back to
Okay,
that.
so if they have made transfers from SMWOBA above what would have otherwise been authorized, it can be reimbursed back basically to meet their needs as well.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank
for the
you very
question,
much.
Delegate
I
Buckle.
appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 84. Thank you. Delegate Cardin calling House Bill 100. And there is a Sarah Call here. Okay,
Just submitted testimony.
okay.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's great to be back here in Ways and Means, my favorite committee for years and years and years.
Oh, I'm gonna tell that other committee you said that.
Well, I think they know already. And last time I was here, there was different seating arrangements, so congratulations to Delegate Vice Chair Wilkins. This bill was initiated by a constituent who called me and said, I got an inheritance of a house worth $500,000, and I had to pay a $50,000 inheritance tax because he was non-exempted. There's only the exempted parties of inheritance are basically very close relatives, mother, father, son, daughter, sibling, spouse are exempted from inheritance tax. Everybody else has to pay. And this was a nephew of whose uncle gave him his house. He didn't have any other issues, so he gave his house to his nephew. The nephew had to pay $50,000, so he had to, in fact, sell the house in order to pay the tax. So he wound up getting some cash, but he didn't get the house. And he said, but I was going to use that house as my primary residence. So I tried to craft legislation that basically had income limits, like for people who are of limited adjusted gross income would be able to pay a lower, not no tax, inheritance tax, but a lower inheritance tax with the same calculation, same formula as the Biden executive order for student loan forgiveness, that same $125,000 income limit for adjusted gross income, that they would pay instead of the 20% of the value of the property that they're receiving, it would be, 10% of the value of the property, it would be 20% of their adjusted gross income. So the example would be if they are making $100,000 and they got a house worth $500,000, they would only have to pay $20,000 as the inheritance tax instead of the $50,000. So it wouldn't be nothing, it would just be less. Spoke to the state bar, they had concerns about a number of different things. And so the amendment that you have before you, you should have all gotten it in your email, as well as staff has a copy, but I can provide a copy to anybody who needs it, narrows this tremendously. It's just, we get rid of the farm issue. We're going to deal with that next year because I'm very interested in preserving farms, but that's a whole nother issue. all it does is says if the person is living in the house and there's no transfer for it to become their primary residence, if it already is their primary residence, they can pay the smaller amount of tax if they're income dependent. So it's a very, very narrow bill now that just deals with people. So if the nephew and the uncle are both living in the house and the uncle wills the house to him, he only has to pay a smaller inheritance in order for him to get his name on the deed and his uncle and the estate's name off the deed. That would be the bill as it is.
Okay, are there any questions for Delegate Cardin? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Delegate Cardin.
And just so you know, the State Bar does not oppose it. They should have a letter in, assuming that that amendment goes through. So I'll deal with staff to make sure that happens.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 100. House Bill 125, Delegate Brammer and Paul Schwartz is here.
You ready? Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Robin Grammer here to present House Bill 125. House Bill 125 phases out the taxation of retirement income in Maryland over a period of 3 years. The topic we hear about most in Maryland is the cost of living. We hear about it in our districts. We hear about it in our committees. We even hear about it in the speeches of governors. Food, property taxes, water and energy costs, phone and cable bills, rent and the cost of housing. You can count on the cost of these inelastic expenditures to go up every year. For many people, something must be cut. This phenomenon isn't exclusive to COVID. Compare these costs to where they were 10 years ago, and you will find radical increases. This is extremely punitive to retired and elderly Marylanders who are 5 to 10 years away from any gainful employment or any cost of living increase. Maryland has and increasingly suffers from an abnormally high cost of living. The taxation of retirement income in our state makes these unrelenting costs of living punitive for retirees whose fixed incomes never meet their needs. It also incentivizes people to leave our state, and we continue to see a net loss of residents every year. Maryland has many aging communities, people who have lived in Maryland their entire lives, people who have worked and paid taxes in Maryland their entire lives, and they wish to age in place close to their families and familiar communities. People of every district want to be able to retire near their children and grandchildren. My most recent discussion about this issue with a constituent of my district was with Angelo, who is at risk of losing his home. He can't afford to pay his property taxes and eat. He has paid off his mortgage on his row home, but his property taxes, account for between 30 and 31% of his income. His household brings in less than $600 a month, and he has less than $300 a month to spend on food. He is desperately looking for relief. When I became a member of the legislature in 2015, the size of the budget was $39 billion. Last year, the size of the budget was $58 billion. That's over a 63% increase in 8 years. Governor Moore's offered a budget of $63.1 billion. The size of our budget has exploded. When do the most vulnerable people of our state, our retirees, get actual relief? It is clear we can afford to stop taxing our retirees out of the state. In the face of skyrocketing inflation, which has put those on fixed incomes underwater, we should eliminate the taxation of retirement income and keep Marylanders in Maryland. With that, I'd be happy to take questions, and I'd ask for a favorable on House Bill 125.
Mr. Schwartz, good to see you whenever you're ready.
I'm ready now. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Paul Schwartz. I represent North National Active and Retired Federal Employees, and we represent over 300,000 federal employees and annuitants living in Maryland. I think it is safe to say that all of us recognize the ongoing problem of senior migration to tax-friendly states and the impact of losing our retirees on Maryland's economy. It's not just to talk about a handout, this is about an impact on the economy. Last year's passage of the Retirement Tax Elimination Act of 2022 was a major step in the right direction. It clearly helped move Maryland out of last place on Bankrate's survey, which had us at 50th out of the worst place to retire to. It moved up to 44. That's not enough, though. We have to do more. And this bill does a little bit more. It's not going to be one bill that's going to keep us in Maryland. And we did do a white paper that we sent out to all the delegates and senators last year to identify the actual impact of the migration. Seniors may retire to Florida for the weather, but they don't go to Delaware or Pennsylvania for the weather. They go because of the cost of living. And when we lose them, we lose to those states, we lose their tax money, we lose their buying power, and we lose their community service with them. So this is a major thing. I'll give you an example that there was a military couple that brought to my attention. It was a military couple, they got a military pension, and they got Social Security. They moved from Waldorf, Maryland to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and saved $24,000 in state taxes. So anybody who thinks that we're not losing seniors and what they bring with them to other states are wrong. We are losing them, and we need to stem that tide. This bill does a lot to do that, and as I said, it's not just one piece. It's several pieces, and this is a critical piece.
Thank you. Any questions for the bill sponsor or the witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you both. Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 125. Calling Delegate Stewart, House Bill 160. And do you have anyone you want to bring up? Karen Kalla, Philemon Kenderziski, Brett Linger, and Paul Schwartz.
All are welcome.
Welcome to Ways and Means, sir.
Thank you. I guess this is tax credit day. Happy to be here. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair in particular, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is House Bill 160. Y'all have heard this bill before. This is a tax credit for long-term care insurance, but just targeted towards a specific group of seniors. And for the benefit of the new people on the committee, I think this might be one of the only tax credit bills you guys hear today that I think ultimately would be revenue neutral, if not revenue positive. And I'll explain why that's the case. So what happened here was that in the 90s and early 2000s, the long-term care insurance industry did some bad math. They messed up. They admit they messed up, but they messed up. They made some faulty actuarial math numbers. And as a result, a lot of people who thought a lot of seniors, or at that point they were not seniors, people in their 50s or 60s, they were doing what they were supposed to do. They went out and they purchased a long-term care insurance product at a young age, and they thought they were locking in a reasonable rate so that when they did need it, and roughly about 70% of seniors end up needing long-term care coverage or long-term care of some kind. And unfortunately for them, they didn't realize that this faulty math had taken place. And unfortunate for them, over the last decade or so, in order to make up for these bad math errors, the insurance companies have hit them with 15% rate hikes year after year after year. Now, 15% is actually the regulatory cap in Maryland. And so we're seeing seniors get hit by that, if not every year, every other year, every 3 years. And if you're on a fixed income and you didn't see this coming, it's not good news. And so what happens if you're on a fixed income and you get hit by price increases on your long-term care policy that you can't afford? Well, you drop it. And what happens when you drop it, but you still need long-term care? You become someone who uses Medicaid for nursing home costs. Now, the average person who needs long-term care uses it for about 3 years. It's longer for women, it's shorter for men, and it costs about $10,000 a month to be in a nursing home that Medicaid will reimburse for, which means about $120,000 is an annual cost for someone on Medicaid that needs nursing home care. And the state picks up a lot of that tab. And so the reason this is a cost saver for Maryland is we're going to provide in this bill a $2,000 tax credit for seniors specifically who have one of these legacy policies. Because the insurance companies are smart. They figured out their mistake. They fixed it. They don't offer these policies anymore. But just for this small group of seniors who, not to be morbid, but they are slowly dying out, right? So this would not be expensive forever for the state of Maryland. But just for that small population that bought these legacy policies that were mispriced, we would offer them a tax credit of $2,000 or 20% of their premiums, whichever is lower, every year. And the goal is to try to keep them from dropping their policy. Because if they drop their policy, we got to pay for them way more in Medicaid costs. I mean, just do the math. Just in 1 year, if we could avoid a single Marylander dropping their coverage and therefore having to spend $300,000 over an average stay for Medicaid, that would be 150 families or 150 people taking advantage of this tax credit, 300,000 divided by the 2,000 in the bill. So we think this can be a cost saver. We think this would provide a little bit more dignity towards those Marylanders that are trying to age in place and stay here and did everything right. And it was absolutely not their fault that this happened to them. And so we're hoping, and we're hoping we can do it in a fiscally responsible way, that if it costs us a little money, well, I think that it's money well spent. If it's revenue neutral, awesome. And if we get a little bit money back because we're saving so much money on Medicaid, that's even better. So with that, I urge a favorable report, and I appreciate y'all's time.
I'm still Paul Schwartz, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to Ways and Means again. As was mentioned, Medicaid is more than a quarter of Maryland's budget. Nursing homes account for a significant cost to Medicaid. So anything that helps keep people in their homes longer before they go into need to go into a nursing home will ultimately have a major positive impact on Maryland's budget. And so this bill helps those who already have the care, but I'm looking for things that actually encourage people to take it out earlier. So I'm looking for tax incentives to get it earlier, but also to keep it when you need it, as this bill does. The question that should have been answered by the legislative services is not how many Marylanders it is anticipated will get the tax exemption and at what immediate cost of revenue. Rather, the question should have been answered is how many Marylanders will have their entrance into nursing homes delayed or eliminated because of their ability to purchase and keep long-term care insurance, and how much does that ultimately save the Treasury of Maryland in the long term? Dynamic scoring is where you don't look just at the immediate loss of revenue, but you look at long-term benefit to the economy. And that's what a bill like this does, as if we expand it, it does more for the long-term effect on the economy. Just a couple of stats. Only 17% of baby boomers have planned for long-term care needs. Only 10% of adults over the age of 65 own long-term care insurance policy. A chance of experiencing a house fire is 1 in 1,200. Chance of being in a car accident is 1 in 240. And chance of needing long-term care is 1 in 2. So it's to our benefit, Maryland and the Treasury, to make it more affordable to get long-term care and to keep the long-term care that you already have. Thank you.
Whoever wants to go next.
Sorry.
Can you, sir, pull that mic around. The county execs did something crazy with that mic. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Philemon Kondrasky here today on behalf of the League of Life and Health Insurers of Maryland and the American Council of Life Insurers, which together account for about 90% of all long-term care policies written in the state of Maryland. I'll keep my testimony brief today. Many of the points I was going to make have already been made by previous speakers. But as you know, the cost of staying in a nursing home has risen dramatically, and the League and ACLI are supportive of any way to promote Marylanders to keep their long-term care insurance policies. Thank you, and with that, we'd like to support HB 160. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Brett Leininger here today on behalf of NAIFA Maryland, which is the Maryland chapter of the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors. We are the ones who sell the policies and also work with the consumers who have purchased the policies when it comes time to claim, in full support of all the comments made before and wholeheartedly support the legislation.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the panel? I have a question. Oh, are you Karen Kalla?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, can you two flip-flop? Thank you. And whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Karen Kalla. I'm a volunteer with AARP Maryland. I'm on the Executive Council. And I also cared for my father in the last 5 years of his 95 years. And since most of this has been said, I would like to, AARP would like to thank Delegate Stewart for sponsoring the bill and for all of the co-sponsors who support it. And I will just keep it brief and say that we do ask for a favorable report from the committee. Thank you. Much of what I was going to say has been said, so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, and we appreciate you not repeating what has already been said. I have a quick question. Delegate Stewart or anyone else on the panel, can you just, and I haven't had a chance to look at the fiscal note, but can you just explain to me how the credit works? So if I'm married and I have a policy that covers both of us, do I get 1 credit? Do I get a larger credit? Can I get 2 credits?
So usually these policies are for individuals. I'm not aware of a married couple long-term care policy.
So if you're married, so both people have to have their separate policy.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so it would be done as an individual policy. So basically, we're targeting a population of seniors who bought their product before 2005. Those are the old products that we're talking about before the insurance industry essentially fixed this. So we want people to continue purchasing them well into the 2020s and 2030s, and that's all great. But we're specifically focused on this group of seniors who did everything right, they bought it early, and now they're the ones that are really getting hit by these rate hikes. And so it's just for a group of seniors that purchased before 2005. Just as an individual, you would be eligible for a tax credit of either $2,000 annually or 20% of your premiums, whichever is less. So if you have a relatively low, usually that's going to be $2,000 because these premiums are going up so high. But if you have somehow, because your policy maybe isn't as generous, you have a relatively low annual premium, then maybe 20% would be lower than $2,000.
Thank you. Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Delegate Stewart, thank you for bringing forward this bill. I think one question is, how many people are under this insurance? Do we know the number?
How many people have long-term care insurance products in the state of Maryland?
No, for this, under this bill.
How many people would try to go for the tax credit?
Yeah.
We don't know that. So that's in the fiscal note, and the reason they can't come up with a for sure analysis is we just don't know, right? Because you'd have to affirmatively apply for it, it's impossible to predict what percentage of the people with these dated long-term care policies would do it. It's not an astronomical number of people that have these dated policies, and probably, even less would actually apply. So we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. We may even be talking about more like hundreds or even low thousands of Marylanders who would take us up on this. So I mean, compared to some of the other tax credit bills that y'all are gonna hear today, we're not talking about an enormous amount of money that we'd be giving up here.
Thank you. I think I'm talking about how many people have this kind of insurance under this bill, right? So I think we should know the number, right, from the insurance company.
Oh yeah, the total number. Does anyone have any idea? Yeah, we can get that for you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a number that we do have, is the total number that have these dated policies.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions for this panel? Okay, I will just say that Mr. Langinger, you look like Timothy Hutton. Have you ever, I don't know if you've ever gotten that before, but you look like Timothy Hutton. I mean, if you ever want to try out for movies or a TV show. Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 160. Thank you all.
She says that to all the
Calling House Bill 39, Delegate Charkoudian, and you can bring up whoever you would like to come up with you. You have Michael Mazeroff, Callie Shumitz.
Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, can I say yay? Congratulations. And colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 39. And what this bill ultimately is about is moving us towards tax justice in this state. So there's a lot of information we don't have, and really this bill is only about collecting information, creating a report so that you all and we all have the information to build a more equitable tax structure. So as it stands now, a multi-state corporation, a publicly traded multi-state corporation, has their profits, which can be tied to Maryland. But before we ever even get to think about the 8.25% tax percentage that theoretically these companies pay, before we even get to that, there's the federal deductions and the federal, there's sort of the federal tax credits that come into play. And then, of course, because there are a whole set of tax credits and tax deductions and so on that this committee has, and this General Assembly has developed over many years, we don't ever really get a picture of what the impact of having all of those various deductions and credits are on what a lot of these multi-state corporations are actually paying to Maryland in terms of their real tax rate. And and this is especially an issue in terms of equity between some of these larger multi-state companies and some of the smaller mom and pop shops. Most of the smaller Maryland-based companies probably have some tax credits that they end up with a rate, the real rate that's somewhat below the corporate tax rate, but not to the extent that a lot of these multi-state corporations do, because you have this sort of the federal piece of it, you have the state piece of it. And so ultimately, we get what we think is a very small percentage of the actual earnings that's being paid. But I could be wrong about that. We could all be wrong about that. But we have no way of knowing, because the way that the information is gathered only ever gives us the actual amount that they pay, and we never get to see the amount that they pay in relation to what the book earnings would have been. And so what this bill does is it asks these multi-state companies to calculate, to take the book earnings, the actual earnings off of Maryland customers, and divide it by what they actually, take the amount they actually paid in taxes and divide it by what they actually made in Maryland. So we could get a sense of, is it close to the corporate tax rate, or is it 1%, or is it 0%, or is it 0.5%? Once we have that information, we can have a better conversation about what's fair, what's appropriate. Did we put together the right mix of tax credits and incentives? But right now, it's very hard to have that conversation because we don't have a sense of what the full impact of all of the various tax credits that we've built over the years are. And so this bill gives us that information. It keeps the information anonymous, so we wouldn't know what any individual company is paying, but the comptroller would take that information and file a report, and we would see that report both in terms of size of company as well as in terms of industry. And that would give us a lot of information that we could then use to create more equity and justice in our tax system. You go next.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Callie Shumitz. I'm with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization working to ensure that all Marylanders can achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared and rising standard of living. We're here in support of House Bill 39 because it's really just a common sense measure to ensure that you all and the public have accurate information on the workings of our corporate tax system. We do know that our tax code today is full of loopholes and special interest tax breaks that allow these large multi-state corporations to artificially reduce or even eliminate their tax responsibilities. And we have data from the comptroller's office that year after year shows that 1/3 of the largest corporations in Maryland pays 0 income taxes on their profits in a typical year. We don't know why. This report is one of those things that would help us evaluate and better understand what the reasons for that are. Skipping over explaining what the bill does because Delegate did a great job of that. But we just believe that fixing our corporate tax code would benefit people from every part of Maryland. It would generate revenue for things like world-class public schools, improved customer service at state agencies. It would level the playing field for small local businesses and build opportunity for all of us by asking more of the small minority of wealthy, overwhelmingly white households that get their income from wealth rather than work. But even if you don't share that view, we still think House Bill 39 is a common sense reform because you can't make good policy without good information. So House Bill 39 would produce the kind of high quality data that you all need to govern effectively and make informed decisions about our tax policy. So we'd ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Name's Michael Mazarov with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in DC. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 39. The bill would require publicly traded corporations to calculate and report to the comptroller their effective state corporate income tax rates, and the comptroller would then issue an annual study compiling and explaining these data. This bill will give policymakers a better picture than is currently available of how well Maryland's corporate tax structure is working to ensure that all corporations pay their fair share of taxes. Maryland has a very weak corporate tax structure in comparison to many other states. Among other flaws, it doesn't mandate combined reporting or contain a throwback rule. Requiring a calculation of the effective corporate tax rate using book income would enable policymakers and the public to understand the cumulative impact of these loopholes and tax breaks. There will be great public benefit in tasking the Comptroller's Office with ensuring the accuracy of corporations' effective tax rate calculations and then issuing its own analysis of the factors explaining these data. Outside analysts like myself do not have access to the relevant book income information at all, since publicly traded corporations file consolidated financial returns, but Maryland requires individual members of a consolidated group to file separate returns. And while we could use the data currently published by the Comptroller to develop estimates and analyses of average effective tax rates based on federal income tax data, these would inevitably be subject to debate and dispute. The Comptroller's own analyses mandated by the bill are likely to be viewed as more authoritative. So again, I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and I recommend a favorable report on House Bill 39. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Buckle, then Delegate Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just had, I guess, two questions. One for my friend and colleague, Delegate Charkoudian. If my reading is correctly, are there any other states in the United States that apply this requirement to businesses or tax filers to do this independent calculation on their state tax filings?
If I may answer, I don't believe there are any other states that sort of have an exact comparable requirement, but I can say that in terms of the aggregate sort of data that states publish that they extract from corporate tax returns and the way they disaggregate it and break it down by industry and so on, there's much greater reporting of this kind of information in other states by state revenue departments. And I'd also say, of course, that that even under financial reporting, for federal tax purposes, on their 10Ks, corporations have to do an effective tax rate calculation and reconciliation of their effective, the tax rate that they're reporting for federal purposes and what they report for what they're actually paying and reconciling that with their federal. With what they're reporting on their federal financial statements. So there's something comparable on their 10Ks.
So would that be a publicly traded, so I'm trying to get this right, so if you're a publicly traded corporation, you're filing a 10K disclosure, you're already giving this information that can be extrapolated out, you're just not reducing it down for Maryland-based income?
You're doing it for federal tax purposes.
The other question I had, and you may be, or whoever feels more comfortable on the panel to answer this question, I'm trying to really narrow the definition of book income versus taxable income. So I think my generic understanding is just book income says, someone gave me $1, that's my income, as opposed to tax income, you're able to offset all of your costs and deductions and things that we have made policy decisions at the state level in this case to say, hey, we don't count those as taxable income. Is that's pretty close?
That's correct, and that is kind of the idea behind the bill, is we do make policies sort of one at a time, and we don't ever get a chance to see what is the cumulative impact of all of those policies on what the then real tax rate, I'll call it, is in terms of the total income that a company is actually making.
Thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the cost to the businesses to do this? Because I'm assuming there's a cost to them and to extrapolate all this information?
So I would say my guess is that they'll tell you that there's a cost, but I'm going to say it's about 2 minutes of somebody's time, because they have their book income, because that's in all their, audited financials. They know what they've paid in taxes, and somebody has to sit down and put those numbers into a calculator and write a few numbers on a form. So we're talking about multi-state, publicly traded companies that have entire accounting departments that spend a lot of time thinking about all the tax credits that are available nationally in every state that they operate in and in Maryland, and do all kinds of complicated calculations. And so taking the handful of numbers that are indicated in this bill and writing them down on a form that they're sending to the comptroller, compared to all of what their accounting departments do, is negligible at best.
And you think that would give you an accurate representation of this information to do what?
I think what we ought to know, we say that we have a corporate tax rate of 8.25%. And I would say that the majority of local mom and pop, small Maryland businesses probably pay someplace close to that, and depending on what their various deductions and so on are, credits. My guess is that a lot of the multi-state companies don't pay anything close to that. And I could be totally wrong, but a lot of us sit around wondering how fair our tax system is for the mom and pops compared to the multi-state and publicly traded companies. And I think we ought to know that. And so if we could see what the combination of all of the federal credits and all of the state credits are resulting in terms of the real tax rate that's being paid, I think we might do nothing with that information. But I suspect it would give us a chance to really think about, do we want to change anything about our tax code to make it more fair, to make it more just, and specifically to make it more fair to the small businesses in Maryland who I think, and I think what this is going to show us, although I could be wrong, I think that the small Maryland businesses are paying more than their fair share, and the multi-state, publicly traded companies are paying less than their fair share. And this is going to give us a chance to see that, if we're right or not about that, and that'll help us then make better tax policy going forward.
So one of the ideas that was brought up earlier was a work group, and it seems to me that this would be more likely to some kind of work group on looking at overall taxes that was brought up. So, I mean, that might be, because we don't, like you were saying, we don't know, and a work group might help us get there. That's just somebody else's idea. I thought it was a good idea.
Thank you.
Delegate Vice Chair. Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll say I was recently flipping through the budget proposal and was very surprised to see that only 3% of our state's revenues come from corporate income taxes. Delegate Charkoudian, would this bill help us understand why such a small percentage of our state's revenues come from corporations?
I think it would, or it may tell us that that small percentage is, we may all decide that that's the fair amount to come from them. But I think that many of us who look at that number and think that's probably not fair would have a little more background information to understand how we got to that point, and then we could have that bigger tax fairness, tax justice conversation that I think a lot of us think is overdue.
Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. There are some individuals signed up to testify unfavorably. They will have 2 minutes as well. Patrick Reynolds, Sarah Price, Andrew Griffin, and Rob Gargiola. And whoever sits on the end here, you two will have to flip-flop just to be able to share the mic. Oh, well, no one has to flip-flop. Whoever wants to go first.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Andrew Griffin here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, testifying in opposition to House Bill 39. You have my written testimony. I think the conversation here boils down to a few points. One, this information is already made available on corporate tax returns. It was just discussed that it's very easy for companies to report this because the numbers are in fact already there. I think the reporting mechanism which was discussed is slightly more complicated as outlined in the bill. It's not simply just numbers. You will see that a company must give a line item as to what types of deductions, subtraction modifications that they may be taking advantage of. It's along the lines of like in school now, it's not just what's the answer to the math problem, it's how you got there. That is also an addition to the reporting here. Not that simple. And I do want to just make a comment as to the discussion about the overall view of what the corporate tax rate is. The policies, the tax policies made by this body, many of them are targeted. They're targeted to invest in certain industries. They're targeted with very specific policy outcomes. I can think of one right now, which I believe is going to be a priority of the new governor's bill and his competitiveness package. And it's to make a decision about business income taxes to help get internet to everybody in the state. And so that is going to be lost in this aggregate view of all companies, what the effective corporate tax rate is. And so I would just proffer that. I will end my remarks there, urge an unfavorable report. I'm happy to have here with me today Pat Reynolds from the Council on State Taxation, who is really an expert on this. And so I appreciate your time.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Pat Reynolds. I am with the Council on State Taxation. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit trade industry group, and our members consist of approximately 500 or so of the largest multi-jurisdictional businesses in the U.S. And our mission is to preserve and to promote the equitable and non-discriminatory taxation of those businesses. So in other words, we are not an organization that says we want no tax. We are an organization that says we want fair, transparent, and equitable taxation. And I got to tell you, HB 39 here is a little bit of a head scratcher for us. Some of you who have heard me testify on similar bills in the past, I think this is the third time I've testified on this particular language. But at the end of the day, this is imposing an administrative burden on businesses to produce information that the comptroller already has. And at the end of the day, it's not going to tell you what I think that what I heard from the sponsor, what they're actually looking for. It is going to tell you the effective tax rate. To calculate the effective tax rate, you need to know how much tax was paid. You need to know the book income of that taxpayer, and you need to know the apportionment factor. All of that is information that is already provided in the Maryland tax return. So this is a little bit of a head scratcher, and it would put Maryland as an outlier in that no other state requires this type of analysis or report with their corporate income tax returns. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, Rob Garagiola with Compass Advocacy on behalf of CTIA, which is the Wireless Communications Association, respectfully unfavorable for House Bill 39. I don't mean to repeat, and I'll be brief, but a number of the points that were made, I'm really just going to emphasize. This is very unique, would be very unique among all states. Maryland, I believe, would be the only state that would have a requirement along these lines, which I think would put Maryland at a competitive disadvantage. This would be administratively burdensome for a lot of businesses as well, with very little effect that would come from that. And then finally, as was mentioned, this information is accessible. We can get that information from the comptroller's office already. And the other aspect of it too, where I think the bill could lead to misleading results, is that there are some timed aspects to taxes as well. For example, depreciation, or some businesses may make prepaid expenses. And because of that, going the route of this legislation could actually provide information that could be misleading in any direction about what a corporation is paying. And so for those reasons, respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 39.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. I will be incredibly brief because I believe it has largely already been said. Our position is that this is unnecessary. The information is already available to the comptroller's office should they choose to spend their resources digging into it. And we believe that this is unnecessary and would urge you to vote unfavorably. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for members of this panel? I saw you moving. Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've heard this bill a few times, and the testimony is pretty consistent and still a little confusing to me, because I think what I heard was this is going to be overly burdensome to provide this information, and this information is already provided. So those two statements are hard for me to rectify. If you're already providing the information, it shouldn't be administratively burdensome to provide it in this form. So can any of the panelists help sort of align those two statements?
I'd be happy to take a crack at it.
Thank you.
And without going too much of a tax nerd or an accounting nerd on you, to calculate an effective tax rate, you need to know the tax amount, which is on the face of the return. You need to know the book income of the taxpayer. The book income is specifically stated on the federal income tax return, which is required to be submitted along with the state income tax return. And then you need the apportionment factor, which is also on the face of the return. You need those three numbers to calculate an effective tax rate. What is very unclear with respect to this bill is, so if you ask me today to calculate an effective tax rate, we could do it pretty simply, right? Using information that's already in the comptroller's possession. But it does include this other provision, including an itemized explanation of how the corporation's effective tax rate was calculated. That's pretty easy. Including the value of any credits, deductions, subtraction, modifications, net operating loss carried forward or backward, or other adjustments applied to determine the state income tax liability of the corporation. Now, depending on how that language is interpreted, you can get into a very sticky wicket and getting into the differences between book income and tax income, which I know was asked earlier. So book income is simply income calculated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, usually on an accrual basis, okay? The generally accepted accounting principles could also be calculated on a cash basis. Most of us individually, when we file our taxes, we use a cash basis accounting system. Accrual basis accounting is used for most businesses. And then you have to analyze the differences between book income and tax income. Well, at the federal level, there's already a huge analysis that is done on the federal Form 1120, the corporate income tax return. It schedules M1, M2, and M3, which contain a very detailed reconciliation between book income and tax income. And then also, as stated by the sponsor, there are differences between federal taxable income and state taxable income. So Maryland has certain additions that are required to be made and subtractions that are required to be made. So this could get very, very complicated and unwieldy, and from the language here, I would have no idea how to fill that out.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the book income is available to the comptroller because the comptroller has a copy of the federal form on which you're reporting it. Correct. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that federal form, does that provide your book income specific to Maryland for a multi-state corporation?
Yes, the federal pro forma should provide book income for that individual taxpayer.
For Maryland's book income for that individual taxpayer?
No, in order to get the Maryland taxable income, you have to take that book income that is listed on your federal return and multiply that by an apportionment factor, and that apportionment factor is also included on the Maryland return, because you have to do the same thing with with tax income today.
So how do you determine the apportionment factor?
The apportionment factor, in this legislature has just changed this to move from a 3-factor apportionment factor to a single sales factor effective with all tax years starting in 2022. So we're just at the tail end of that phase in. So the apportionment factor, just assuming that we're talking about the single sales factor apportionment going forward, that is simply your sales or your gross receipts in Maryland versus your sales or gross receipts everywhere. And it's a fraction. So you're taking how much business is done in Maryland versus how much business you do everywhere, and you multiply that fraction times, if you're looking for the book income, you multiply it by the book income to obtain your Maryland book income, or just like you do today on the tax return, you multiply that fraction times your federal taxable income as adjusted with the Maryland adjustments to come up with your Maryland tax income.
And why do you use an apportionment factor as opposed to the actual Maryland book income?
Because most states in this country, when they decided how to calculate corporate income tax liability, they decided that they did not want to use what's called separate accounting, and they decided to use an apportionment method. So every state in the country that imposes a corporate income tax uses some apportionment method of determining how much of that corporation's income is in state versus everywhere else.
Okay, but the corporation still would have the data of what their actual Maryland book income is.
Data. I'm sorry, the answer, or the question was, do they already have that information today? And that answer depends on what sort of internal accounting that they have called for, because most businesses would have an income statement as a whole for the business for the entire country wherever they operate. So they don't necessarily have income and loss statements by particular state, because there's no need for it.
Okay. Madam Chair, I beg for just one more topic here. I guess what is the harm in reporting this information specifically to the state?
So again, depending on how this language is interpreted, it could be a huge administrative burden. It's information that's already at the comptroller's office. And third, at the end of the day, I go back to, I don't know what you're going to do with that information, because if you're just simply looking for an effective tax rate, that's easy to calculate, but it's not going to go into the nuances between book and tax income at the federal level. It's not going to go into the nuances of book versus tax income and the policy choices made by this legislature. None of that will come into play.
I understand that. I believe the sponsor's intent is to provide information, and then the legislature could review that and I think understand that nuance and look at the factors at play and look at the impact of policy decisions. I guess one thing that would be really helpful for me, and I'm going to wrap up here, Madam Chair. Thank you for the indulgence. It would be really helpful if you could offline follow up with us and just give us a detailed account of where you think each of these items is already reported. Because if what you're saying is all this information is already available, that's not the information that we've gotten from the comptroller's office, and I should say the previous comptroller's office, right? But it would be really helpful to know exactly where you think each of these items is already in the comptroller's data. Because if what you're saying is accurate, then there may be another way to achieve this, but that's not what we've heard from the comptroller's office in the past. So it would be really helpful just to offline follow up with exactly where each of these items is already reported.
Sure, and my contact information is in my written statements, and I would be happy to have a conversation with you.
Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Excuse me, just very briefly to follow up with respect to that, Mr. Reynolds is probably best. To try to make it as simple for me to understand, you're saying that the number, the effective tax rate, 2%, 1%, 11%, whatever it is fairly easy to calculate for people. You know, I'm getting bad flashbacks to taking corporate taxation at the University of Maryland Law School. It's a horrible class. And when I hear you talk about these things, it sounds like tax accountants, tax professionals could figure out the number fairly easily with the information that's provided on the return. What is the burden and what's so much more difficult to figure out is how you got to the number through the myriad, and if you're talking multi-state corporations, publicly traded, there may be thousands upon thousands of calculations of depreciation, interest, investments, tax credits, you know, assessable losses from operating units, mergers, acquisitions. All of those things would be the company's job to go back and spell those out, the way I read the bill, under the penalties of perjury and how they apply to the Maryland tax. Is that a fair estimate?
Spot on.
Okay. I'm glad, you know, I wish my corporate tax professor was still alive and he could hear you say that. But, you know, it seems to me that that's the administrative burden. And I think your testimony was, to your knowledge with your national panel, there is no other state that makes any business operating anywhere do that.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question, Mr. Reynolds. And you got thrown under the bus because they said you were the expert. So
that's all right.
I mean, it's not spot on for me. I didn't understand what my colleague just said here. Delegate Buckle, who I love, hugs. William and Mary is spot on. So I'm trying to understand, and I think my colleagues are trying to understand what you said it's a huge administrative burden. So what does that mean? Does that mean, you know, you need 5 people to figure this out, 10 people? Do you need 1 person? Is there going to be some significant cost? I think that's kind of the big question mark up here.
So what I come back to is, if all you're looking for is the calculation of the effective tax rate, that's easy. It involves 3 numbers that are already part of the information that's submitted with a tax return in Maryland. What is not easy is if you look at the language talking about an itemized explanation of how it was calculated, including the value of any credits, deductions, subtraction, modifications, net operating losses carried forward or backward, or other adjustments applied to determine the state income tax liability of the corporation. When you get into that language, 1, I'm not sure what you're asking for. But number 2, if I had to guess, I would say you're looking for an analysis between book and tax income at the federal level, which is already included in the federal Form 1120 on Schedules M1, M2, and M3. And then you're also looking for an explanation of the differences between federal taxable income and Maryland taxable income. All of that is included on the Maryland tax return. So there's an element of the unknown here, in that I don't know what exactly is being looked for here.
Well, so I'm sorry, not to cut you off.
Go ahead.
So you said some information is on the federal M1, 2, and 3, and then something's on the Maryland tax return. So that is information that would be available and could just, I would believe, would already be in the business's possession. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that would just need to be compiled. And then the first thing, I can't remember, you said was easy. I can't remember what that was. So
That's the calculation of the effective tax rate.
So that doesn't seem too burdensome. If you already have the federal tax return information and the Maryland tax return information, and then you got the calculation, that just seems.
And it would also be
kinda
easy
down and
for the
dirty.
comptroller to put that information together, because that information is in the comptroller's hands.
That is accurate, but that is not what this bill is asking. Thank you very much. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 39. House Bill 28, Delegate Lehman. And Delegate, you can bring up whoever you like. I have Karen Kala, Ji Chen, Anthony Davis, and then there are two folks that are virtual.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and Vice Chair Wilkins. So good to be here, members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Mary Lehman, Delegate Mary Lehman, asking your support of HB 28 with amendments that you should have, and that is a bill to allow unpaid caregivers who provide services to older family members in their homes to claim qualified expenses on their state income tax of up to $5,000 for one family member and up to $10,000 for two or more family members. I do have amendments to the bill, including one that would cap the total amount of credit certificates issued in any fiscal year at $5 million. So disregard that huge figure you see in the fiscal note, please. The bill's purpose is to ease the financial burden of those caregivers who are taking care of an older family member. HB 28 offers a tax credit to caregivers who are taking care of a family member who is 60 years or older in their home at least 6 months of the year in the reporting year. And a family member is anyone who is related by blood or marriage. So to be able to claim this credit, the taxpayer must first submit to the Department of Health the taxpayer and the qualified family member's name, proof of qualified expenses, and any other information the department requires. The list of qualified expenses for which the taxpayer can claim credit has been amended. It includes home health services, adult medical daycare, food prep and grocery shopping, light housekeeping, respite care, and durable medical equipment, as well as home care equipment and supplies. The taxpayer has to submit proof of those qualified expenses with the state income tax return. Along with proof of expenses, the taxpayer will also submit a letter of medical necessity that does have to be signed by a licensed physician or a nurse practitioner that the applicant provided to the senior family member assistance with at least 3 activities of daily living. We do not have solid statistics on how many Marylanders are caring for older family members in the caregiver's home. I asked this question of the Comptroller's Office, of the Department of Health, of the Department of Aging. No one had those numbers. However, the Department of Aging shared with me that in trying to design a support program for caregivers during the height of the pandemic, they assumed a number of 250,000. What we do know is that those who care for older adult family members get little or no monetary compensation, and in many cases, it actually causes significant financial hardship for the caregiver, including time off from a paid job. AARP data, and you will hear from AARP, from 2017 found that across the U.S., there's more than 53 million U.S. adults who are unpaid older adult caregivers. The state of Missouri enacted an elder care tax credit bill nearly 25 years ago, and that has not had a great financial strain on that state. The state of Arizona adopted similar legislation in just 2021, and New Jersey, the New Jersey State Assembly is currently considering an elder care tax credit bill. I have heard from many, many Maryland caregivers who say they need this kind of financial relief and support. I thank you for your consideration, and I ask for a favorable report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Whoever would like to go next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jie Chen. I'm a professor from the Department of Health Policy Management in the School of Public Health, University of Maryland, and the College Park. And I'm here to support HB 28. Informal informal caregiving plays a significant role in assisting older adults, and 83% of the help provided to the older adults comes from family members, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. And as we saw during the COVID-19, when healthcare system break down or are not available at the first time, in the first place, family caregivers step in and cover whatever is needed: healthcare, chores, transportations, meals, personal care, language translations, and IT support to use telemedicine. So caregivers often sacrifice their own career and financial stability. And the family caregiving carries a considerable personal and financial cost. Nearly half of caregivers have experienced at least one financial setback, including dipping into personal savings, cutting back on spending, and reducing savings for their own retirement. And on average, caregivers spend $7,242 annually on out-of-pocket costs related to caregiving. And this calculation does not even include the long-term impacts on their own health, mental well-being, and the loss of productivity. And hence, informal caregivers need support to reduce their financial strains, and the 2022 National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers had advocated for that. And they actually asking for tax credits for family caregiver out-of-pocket care expenses. And as of now, 9 states allow family caregivers to claim some caregiving-related expenses as refundable tax credits. Hence, I'm here to support this HB 22. And I want to mention that everyone here today is likely to be a family caregiver and need a family care one day. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Karen Calla. I'm a member of the AARP Maryland Executive Council, and AARP would like to thank Delegate Lehman and the co-sponsors for this very important bill. A lot of the data has already been said. I would like to say that in 2020, a national survey showed that 61% of family caregivers are women. About 54% of caregivers who provide care to a relative or friend are 50 or older. And those most likely to provide 5 years of care are ages 50 to 64. And as I mentioned before, I lived with my father in his late years. I spent the last 5 years of his 95 years taking care of him. And as we all know, things happen. There's macular degeneration, there are long-term illnesses that take their toll. And I often said to myself, I feel like I'm living 2 lives. I'm living his, helping him live his through me, and actually living mine too. And it's a lot to juggle. And I would give anything to have him back here today and continue to do it, but it's a lot. It's a whole lot. And the expenses, the respite that comes from being able to have people come into the home and give the caretakers a break, the caregivers a break, is really important and very helpful. Many of us do this on top of a full-time job. Many people do it who give their time and money who really don't have it to give. So thank you so much, the co-sponsors, Delegate Lehman, and all of you for considering this bill, and AARP request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Is there a Anthony Davis here? Yeah, I'm sorry. You can come up to your favorable. Can you sit on this end to my, oh, there, that works too.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Atterbury, Vice Chair, esteemed members. My name is Anthony Davis. I'm a Director of Advocacy for Consumer Law at Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid serves all 24 jurisdictions in Maryland from 12 offices. We were invited by Delegate Lehman to report on this proposed legislation. And when we consider legislation in respect to our clients, I'm speaking of a low-income population, a senior population, many single-family households. When we consider legislation, we look at a need, the need to the affected population. We look at whether there's a struggle to meet that need, and we also look at, does this proposed legislation address the need? In all aspects, we answer unequivocally yes. Certainly there's a need, there's a benefit to the single-family household members, to a family that is working in a multi-generational situation. We have working parents, you have older family members that you're caring for, you have children involved. As everyone pointed out, there are a lot of factors to consider when you're caring for a child, a lot of things that you have to give up. Our households typically are around $35,000 for a family of 4, up until about $60,000 for a family of 4, depending on the requirements and restrictions. And when you look at what this can save, you're looking at things like 6 months worth of food. You're looking at things like lights and gas cut on for a year. The savings of a $5,000 or $10,000 really produces direct benefits to our clients who really need a break, and especially in these times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for this panel? Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Lehman, for this bill. This is a really important issue that impacts a lot of families in all of our districts across Maryland, so thank you for that. I'm not sure if you have seen, we got a letter of information from the Comptroller's Office. I'm happy to share it with you and discuss with you. There are a couple of points they raise, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'm happy to discuss offline, but if you have any.
I did not see it. However, I did have an extensive conversation because this was a pre-filed bill. The Comptroller's Office actually reached out to me and made many recommendations. So I'm not sure what the letter says, but I suspect it's probably some of what we discussed. But go right ahead.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, they raised a couple of concerns about sort of the administrative process in terms of documentation and everything that would be submitted, and wondered about maybe having an agency that would be better suited to help families with that documentation, and then issue sort of a voucher for the credit, right? And another idea was, or possibility they raised, was thinking about this in terms of a tax credit really delays the reimbursement, and that timing can be an important factor. And so if we looked at this rather than as a tax credit, as a grant program, it might actually provide better assistance in terms of being more timely reimbursement. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts or reactions to those 2 points, or I'm happy to continue offline.
No, thank you for the raising that, and I am open to both suggestions. I did take the suggestion that I try to identify another agency to do what the comptroller staff was calling either predetermination or pre-certification. And in talking to other state agencies, I landed on the Department of Health because it has a determination, office, eligibility or determination office already, as opposed to a smaller agency that has, already a lot on its plate like DHS. So that was one of the amendments to the bill, that the Department of Health deal with that on the front end, the predetermination. And then on the issue of tax credits versus a direct grant, I'm a little bit agnostic. I mean, I want the relief as quickly as possible. I welcome, my panel answering that question as well, but I do want to get that relief to families as quickly as possible without it being really burdensome. And that is a concern with having to submit, all the receipts. That's already burdensome enough, and we need folks to do that. But I don't want it to be delayed or to be too cumbersome. So thank you.
Any other questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We do have 2 individuals signed up to testify virtually, Jennifer Eastman and Teresa Robertson, who are favorable with an amendment. So Ms. Eastman, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Eastman, and while I am the Director of Community Living Policy at the Maryland Department of Disabilities, I am testifying today as the chair to the Maryland Commission on Caregiving. So my testimony reflects the position of the commission and not the department. Serving as the voice of the caregiver, the Maryland Commission on Caregiving is charged with recommending policies that positively impact family caregivers, soliciting and responding to their concerns, and acknowledging their contributions. The Commission is pleased to testify in support of House Bill 28 with one amendment. This bill would allow taxpayers a modest reprieve from the financial burden of caring for their loved one by allowing a credit of up to $5,000 on their state income tax for out-of-pocket expenses related to supporting the person in the taxpayer's home. These qualified expenses are varied and really reflect the diverse needs of the caregiver and the care recipient. Due to the need for specialized non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, the Commission is requesting that expenses related to NEMT be added as an amendment. Family caregivers provide most of the long-term care needs of older adults, many of whom are leaving the workforce early to provide adequate care or are using their leave, whether it's paid or not. This not only has an impact on their current finances, but their future wealth potential. Combine that with the average costs, out-of-pocket costs of about $7,200 a year that is typical of a caregiver, and the financial burden is magnified. The alternative, institutional care, is more expensive, averaging about $120,000 a year, and equates to a lesser quality of life for the care recipient. House Bill 28 is an investment in caregivers and an acknowledgement of their contributions, which is why the Commission urges a favorable report with the adoption of the recommended amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Eastman? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Ms. Robertson, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
I started working when I was 14 years old, and as a young adult, I had plans to become a project manager, professional, and I landed an almost six-figure job in DC. As my husband's health started to decline, I had to take jobs closer to home so that I could be more available to him. It wasn't long before I had to take even more entry-level positions with less stress and more flexibility. And in 2019, I made the decision to leave corporate America, and my side hustle became my full-time work-from-home job because of safety reasons with him. After 26 years of caring for my chronically ill husband, we depleted my retirement savings. And even though today I work about 60 hours a week, I'm still hovering just around the poverty level. To say that we need programs like this for people like me is an understatement. I'm here to represent the millions of unpaid family caregivers in the United States. We make sacrifices for our loved ones because we know it's better for them to be cared for at home and not in an institution. We work hard and pay out of pocket for services, equipment, and care because we need it. Every time we write a check, we feel it. I have a friend who needed to provide an ambulance for their loved one, and she told me it cost $100 to go to the doctor and $100 to bring him back home from the doctor, and they pay out of pocket because they aren't able to get the insurance company to cover the cost. And so that's why I, along with other members of the Maryland Commission, support HB 28 with the amendment to qualified expenses to include reimbursement for qualified non-emergency medical transportation. HB 28 offers an opportunity for relief and a chance to make sure that Marylanders can live safely in their homes a little while longer. And the qualifying expenses in this bill allow families to work a little bit more, reallocate their funds, and provide support to family caregivers who already have given so much and desperately need your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. Is there any questions?
Madam Chair, if I could. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I was going to make a comment.
I was confused where that was coming from.
No, I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to say that I view the recommendation by Ms. Eastman as on emergency medical transport to be a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, that goes right along with my question. That's exactly what I was going to ask, because in my day job, I am an eye doctor and I see a lot of patients, and I have a lot of, sometimes that's the only time I actually see the caregiver. Sometimes that's the only time the caregiver is coming out of the house or getting out of the house, and they do have to pay or have somebody else either, stay with their loved one that can't come with them. So I appreciate you bringing this bill forward. I understand that there may be grants and things like that, but that may, again, when you're dealing with these type of situations, there's not a lot of time in the day. and there's not a lot of time for them to either fill out applications or what the grant specifications would be. And this seems to me to be much more of a simple overall approach to being able to take care of this. And if you're going to put the transportation cost as well, because obviously people are dealing with a lot of vision-related issues and things like that as they get older, even as the caregiver, that would be very helpful. So thank you, and thank you. The other thing is, do you have
That
any?
was
Oh,
an
I'm sorry.
isn't it so question.
Oh, it wasn't no. Isn't it so?
Because
Do
we
you
ask
have,
That is so, yes, that
It
is so.
Isn't that so?
Yes.
And do you have any information on how many people have actually had to leave their jobs, things like that, leave employment to be caregivers?
I do not. Immediate past Aging Secretary Kramer shared some of those concerns about getting a better handle on those statistics when she talked to me again in early January before she departed, said it's frustrating that we don't even know, that we can't give you a number of how many people are in these caregiving situations. I don't know if, AARP or other groups have any more insights. The one statistic I shared with you was national. And just, if I could, Madam Chair, to Delegate Feldmark's point that this is an issue that affects really all of our communities. In preparing for this hearing, I came across an interesting statistic, and I believe it was from AARP, that in 1971, just 7% of U.S. households were multi-generational. Now about 1 in 5 U.S. households are multi-generational, and we do expect that number to grow.
Okay, any further questions? Thank you very much. Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 28. Delegate Lehman, stay where you are, calling House Bill 46. And I will call up Callie Schumitz, Don Griswold, and Maddie Long.
Madam Chair, I'm just running back to get my other testimony.
That's fine. And if we,
Chair, do you have Michael Mazrov?
yes, I was just about to say he could step forward. He is favorable with an amendment. If that's okay with the sponsor, he can be up there.
Good afternoon again, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, Ways and Means members. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman, back for the 4th consecutive year to ask your support of combined reporting of corporate income. And this is HB 46. If Maryland adopts combined reporting, it would become the 30th state to change how corporate income tax is calculated and provide a more accurate accounting of the profits that multi-state corporations earn from activities in Maryland. It would do so by taxing an out-of-state subsidiary's profits that can be attributable to a firm's in-state operations. Some corporations and their trade associations that you will hear from today, either in person or in writing, are going to cry foul and claim they will leave Maryland if we adopt combined reporting. I hope this will be the year that we say that that dog won't hunt here anymore, and we join the likes of Alaska, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, Texas, and West Virginia to capture taxes on the profits that multi-state companies earn here under a combined reporting law. Under that law, a multi-state parent company and its subsidiaries are treated as one corporation for state income tax purposes. It establishes that multi-state corporations report to the state their income based on the amount of Maryland business they conduct. This prevents the multi-state company from reducing its taxable profits through a whole range of accounting tactics. So 2 issues to think about with this bill, and one is fairness, the other is lost revenue. On the issue of fairness, combined reporting puts larger multi-state companies on more equal tax footing with those businesses whose enterprises are Maryland only. Small to medium-sized Maryland businesses cannot afford tax avoidance structures, and in that way, large multi-state corporations have an unfair advantage. Multi-state corporations and their employees also consume Maryland resources and services. They're using our roadways, our bridges, they ride our mass transit, they use our parks and trails, their kids attend our public schools, yet the employers do not pay their fair share of taxes. Combined reporting is well established in red states and in blue states. There are currently combined reporting laws in effect in 29 states. That's the last figure I could find. I hope that's up to date, as well as the District of Columbia. Illinois adopted combined reporting all the way back in 1982. The Maryland General Assembly first considered combined reporting legislation 36 years ago in 1986. That was the year that Maine adopted combined reporting. Hawaii and New Hampshire have both now considered moving to international combined reporting. Finally, the fiscal note estimates combined reporting could net our state more than $222 million per year in general fund and special fund revenues. That's by 2028. The bill, of course, would have no effect on local or small businesses, as it only applies to large corporations. I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. The next person can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, I'm Michael Mazarov, Senior Fellow with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in DC, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of HB 46. Combined reporting remains an essential tax policy reform for Maryland if it is to have a fair and robust corporate income tax. Year in and year out, the state suffers significant erosion of its corporate tax base because of corporate tax avoidance techniques that exploit the absence of combined reporting. There are several abusive tax avoidance strategies to which non-combined reporting states are vulnerable. Most of them can't be stopped at all through any policy change other than combined reporting. Over the many years that adoption of combined reporting has been considered here, this committee has undoubtedly heard claims that it would discourage corporations from investing in the state and perhaps even cause companies already here to leave. There is simply no support for such claims. Several years ago, I looked at Maryland's 120 largest corporations. 3/4 of them had facilities in 5 or more combined reporting states, and over a quarter maintained their headquarters in combined reporting states. I do want to urge the committee to consider removing a provision of the bill that provides a new tax deduction to offset a purely on-paper effect of the adoption of combined reporting on some corporations. I think this is not a wise provision. It will eventually cost the state a significant share of the revenue the bill is intended to raise. And I explain why in my written testimony, and I'll be happy to answer questions about it. The enactment of combined reporting can make an important contribution to preserving Maryland's tax base from further erosion and ensuring the multi-state corporations compete on a level playing field with wholly in-state corporations and other multi-state corporations that don't seek to push the tax avoidance envelope. I urge the committee to favorably report HB 46 with the deferred tax provision removed, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Madam Vice Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Don Griswold. I'm appearing as a reformed tax avoidance enabler. Here's the bad news. Avoiding Maryland corporate income tax is as easy as shooting fish in a barrel. Here's the good news. It's just as easy to shut it all down. For 3 decades, I created and defended multi-million-dollar tax avoidance strategies that impacted Maryland and around the country. As a planner, I led a 600-person multi-state tax avoidance shop at KPMG. As a litigator, I defended these completely legal strategies in court. And as an insider, I worked in Omaha as executive tax counsel at Berkshire Hathaway. But I quit all of that a year ago, and now I work on the side of tax justice. Here's what you need to know about state corporate income tax avoidance. The strategies can be highly complex, and high-paid enablers keep their clients always 3 steps ahead of you. So before you enact a focused anti-abuse rule like add backs or transfer pricing, they've already moved on to the next generation of strategies. But virtually all of these strategies are variations on a simple theme. An avoider essentially moves their profits from the left side of the table to the right side of the table. If Maryland's only taxing the left side, you lose. But tax the whole table, and the avoider's sleight of hand, it's useless. Maryland taxes all the profits. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. Once again, my name is Callie Schumans with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. We support House Bill 46 because it would make our tax code more equitable, level the playing field for small businesses, while raising hundreds of millions of dollars for investments that would build opportunity across Maryland. As you see in the fiscal note, by fiscal year 2026, this would raise more than $200 million per year. And while Maryland's fiscal position is strong today, as you all heard last week, the recent data improvements and how we're defining poverty and education have revealed that we've been underfunding public schools even more deeply than we realized. To properly fund education, along with our many other needs and maintain a structural balance, we need to raise additional revenue, and this would help fill that gap. We also believe that these investments in the things that Maryland's families and businesses and communities need to thrive would help strengthen our economy. When researchers ask business leaders what they actually care about in deciding where to locate, they consistently say that the #1 factor is access to skilled workers. Maryland has the second highest share of advanced degree holders among the 50 states, and the revenue from House Bill 46 will help us continue to build tomorrow's skilled workforce. Business leaders' #2 concern is transportation access, and House Bill 46 would raise $169 million over 5 years for the Transportation Trust Fund to help support continued investment in our transportation system. Requiring combined reporting is an important step towards fixing our upside-down tax code and building opportunity for all. More than half of the new revenue from combined reporting would come from the wealthiest 5% of Maryland households, and the largest impact on those, with the largest impact on those who are in the wealthiest 1%. So we'd ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Maddie Long, and I'm a policy fellow with Strong Schools Maryland here in support of House Bill 46. As a member of the Maryland Fair Funding Coalition, my organization has supported previous attempts to modernize the state's tax code for the benefit of the public and align Maryland with the 29 other states that have this policy. Currently, corporations are able to avoid paying their fair share of Maryland tax through our current tax system. Resources that should be accounted for in public funds and used in the service of the public good, like education, are not captured in our existing tax formulas. If you refer to our written testimony, you can see that we have not been accurately counting Maryland children in poverty. In fact, we've been perpetually ignoring the existence of 1 in 9 students across the state. With new methods in place, we are now getting a more accurate count, which makes it more necessary now than ever to capture lost revenue so we can make good on our promise to fully fund the blueprint. The fiscal note for House Bill 46 projects that by fiscal year 26, these changes could generate more than $204 million in revenue. Fiscal year 26 happens to be the exact year that the future of the Blueprint Fund is cast into doubt. A favorable vote on House Bill 46 positions Maryland better in the face of the question, how will we maintain our commitment to the blueprint for Maryland's future and the world-class schools our students deserve? Investment requires real vesting in the present. This means that no matter which way you vote, large, wealthy corporations will still benefit. The difference is that with your support on House Bill 46, students and school communities see some tangible benefit. That's fairness. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report on House Bill 46. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to this panel for coming out and testifying. We appreciate the expertise. Questions, Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think this question is for Mr. Griswold, if I have your name correct. I think in your testimony you mentioned some skepticism about things like states doing add backs, and I see in the fiscal note for the bill that Maryland currently has an add back modification for specified interest and intangible expenses. Can you just elaborate on that? How effective is our current add back provision?
It's very effective if you happen to be going after one of scores of strategies that companies are using to avoid their taxes in Maryland. I think what you have to understand is that the illustration I was trying to make is that there are many, many ways to move your profits from one legal entity to another, to move them out of Maryland. And if you look in the testimony, I wrote a 4-part series after leaving the tax avoidance community that just lays bare the innovation principles of doing it. I broke it down to a dozen building blocks of building these strategies, divided the strategies into 6 different families of strategies. There are scores of ways you can do this. Royalties that you're adding back with that one rifle shot solution, that's a 1983 strategy or earlier. The first case on it was in 1983. So how many decades is that behind the game? The only way, and this is constantly innovating, this industry is constantly getting out ahead and doing more that you've never thought of. As Mr. Mazarov said earlier, there is only one strategy that shuts them all down, and it's combination. But if I could add to that, the bill doesn't go far enough. It's a great start. But you've got combined reporting that is only at the water's edge. It just deals with companies that are in the US. You need to go worldwide because they're they're already going offshore. You're missing a ton of it if you don't go worldwide. So I'd suggest if all you can get is combined reporting water's edge, that's great. It's an important step forward. But you're still very leaky, and you're still what I call a voluntary victim state. You're doing it to yourselves, guys. Yeah, this is so easy to do. Adopt combined reporting and go all the way to worldwide.
Thank you. I actually do have a question for Mr. Mazarov. We've heard this bill a few times in the past, and part of the pushback on the bill has been that this can be bad for the future in terms of if there's ever bad economic times. Can you share a little bit more about how we've seen this play out in other states?
Well, I think the best example, what people are citing there is the fact that Maryland had a system in place for a number of years, I think beginning in 2006 through 2010, if I recall correctly, where corporations were required to file hypothetical pro forma or hypothetical returns under combined reporting, and then the comptroller issued a report comparing their liability under their hypothetical returns with what they actually paid in those years. And for 2 of those years, which corresponded with the Great Recession, the data showed that that there was slight reduction in their liability under combined reporting as compared to what they paid under the current system. So what I would say about that is, it's for the 5 years taken as a whole, the combined reporting resulted in a net revenue gain of about 8%, I think, over what they actually paid in those years. We're talking about the Great Recession, a once in a generation, once in a century downturn. There was a particular pattern in the Great Recession where Maryland's economy was not affected to the same extent as other states were. That allowed corporations under these pro forma returns to bring in losses in other states. There's no reason to assume necessarily that future recessions would result in that same pattern of Maryland's economy being relatively insulated relative to the rest of the country. Notwithstanding that, I mean, as has already been said, the fiscal note on this bill is about $200 million a year now. It makes the corporate income tax is inherently a more volatile tax. It makes sense to bank some of that revenue and keep it in the rainy day fund to deal with that volatility. But the notion that somehow a once in a generation recession justifies foregoing $200 million a year and more in additional revenue just seems to make no sense to me. And then finally, I'd say the other thing I would point to is that Rhode Island also had a pro forma combined reporting requirement in effect for a number of years. And to my knowledge, and subsequently adopted combined reporting, to my knowledge, Rhode Island is the only state that has ever gone back after it adopted combined reporting and looked at how much additional revenue it generated. And for the corporations that were subject to combined reporting in Maryland, in Rhode Island concluded that it boosted their corporate tax liabilities in the aggregate by almost 50%. So, for all those reasons, I think to base a decision on this on a one-time phenomenon that occurred in a once-in-a-generation recession pattern when the fiscal note on the bill is showing hundreds of millions of dollars in additional revenue would be really, would not make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Delegate Lehman, and thank you to this panel. We now have a panel of unfavorables. Please come to the front, Patrick Reynolds, Sarah Price, Andrew Griffin, and Rob Garagiola.
I will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Andrew Griffin here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce in opposition to House Bill 46. I debated or not whether to make the joke, but I'm going to do it. We have heard this bill many, many years. It is fitting. It is on Groundhog Day. Here to say we urge an unfavorable report. Nobody laughed as much as I thought you would, but I appreciate it. The main points I want to make on the bill, we have submitted lengthy testimony. I also, and I'm not going to talk about this now, but the Chamber did have an analysis done this past summer to look at what would adopting combined reporting do to the state's overall economic competitiveness with our surrounding neighbors. I have included that report as part of our testimony. Casual reading. The 3 points I want to make. One, there's been discussion about the add-back provision. 2004, you all gave the Comptroller's Office authority to go after intercompany transactions. I think that it's interesting and important, and I cannot speak necessarily to the companies that are allegedly light years ahead of our policies. Virginia just did a study on this very issue. The report was issued in 2021, the interim. The two main reasons that they decided to not adopt combined reporting. So in their General Assembly was majority Democratic Party, I would add. The first and foremost, they did not think combined reporting would address intercompany transactions any differently than their current add-back provisions already do. Those are the exact same add-back provisions which our comptroller has. How effectively our comptroller uses them, I'm not totally sure. We've engaged their office over the years, and I think we'd still like to know that. Two, it's commonly alleged, right, and the discussion's just been had about increasing revenues. I think what I will say, the comptrollers, to end my time, the comptroller study done in 2006, we would say that to this point, that data is almost obsolete. But what is pertinent going into the Great Recession?
You need to wrap up.
If you Google is the United States going to go into an economic recession? Consensus is 65% of economists say yes.
Thank you.
Urge unfavorable part. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Pat Reynolds again with the Council on State Taxation. You have my written testimony in opposition to this bill. It's interesting that Again, on Groundhog Day, we're back here saying similar things that we have said in the past. But one of the things that I have said in the past is that combined reporting is a two-edged sword, okay? You heard the proponents of the bill talk about the fact that this could bring in out-of-state income that you could tax. I guarantee you the converse is also true. Companies can bring in out-of-state losses to offset their in-state gains and reduce their tax. And every state that has studied this issue, including Maryland, has come to the same conclusions that it will create winners and it will create losers. There may be an overall increase, there may be an overall decrease, but it will create winners and it will create losers. So I urge you at the end of the day, don't have to listen to me. Listen to the folks that you commissioned to do a study on this, on combined reporting, and read the Augustine Commission report. If you read the Augustine Commission report, it will recommend to you that not only should you not adopt combined reporting, you should make clear your intent not to adopt combined reporting. Happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Rob Garagiola with Compass Advocacy. Again, here on behalf of CTIA, the Communication Wireless Association, here respectfully and unfavorable for House Bill 46. There are four reasons actually I want to touch on. Number one, for those that are new to the committee, this has been explored before. The leadership of the Maryland General Assembly years ago had set forth a commission. It was referenced the Augustine Commission. There's a much longer name to that. And there were a number of Democratic legislators and some Republican legislators that served on that. And they issued a report in 2016, and it was actually, they strongly recommended against combined reporting with respect to Maryland's competitiveness in trying to attract businesses, strongly opposed. Number two, it would put Maryland at a competitive disadvantage. Virginia, as was mentioned earlier, does not have combined reporting, and they studied this as recently as 2021. Pennsylvania does not have combined reporting. Delaware does not have combined reporting. Third, there's been a lot of talk about the top line of the fiscal note and the numbers that it could bring to the state of Maryland. And I would direct you to page 6 of the fiscal note, the first full paragraph, which gets a little more into the nuance that's been discussed a little bit by the two prior speakers. And that the fiscal analyst says that the numbers that they've estimated could vary significantly from what might actually occur. That there could be a significant increase in volatility of corporate tax revenues if this policy went forward, and that the bill's effect on corporate tax revenue may be positive or may be negative in any given year. And what we've heard, and I think you were touching on, is there's potentially an impending recession. And it's typically in recession years when the state needs the revenue that combined reporting oftentimes can have the opposite effect in bringing in other losses, which could mean a more challenging time for Maryland. With that, I would urge unfavorable. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Madam Chair.
Thank you. And before the next person begins, if Bernie Marzik is in the room, you can go ahead and come up as well. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, still here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. The panel has established why combined reporting is a bad idea for Maryland. We've all seen the battles over the last several years as states have vied for new corporate headquarter locations. I would emphasize the point that Maryland must remain competitive in this sphere. West Virginia is our only neighboring state that utilizes combined reporting, and the precedent has been firmly set that Maryland does not cede anything to West Virginia. So I would encourage us to not follow our neighbor down this path of policy, and I would urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
You can switch chairs with someone.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Madam Chair, Bernie Marzick from Cornerstone Government Affairs, here today on behalf of the Manufacturers Alliance of Maryland, respectfully in opposition to House Bill 46. I wanted to focus on the history as well as some of the other folks up here have talked about, especially due to the new members in the General Assembly, but with this committee hearing this bill for the first time. They only reference one commission, but back in 2006, back in 2010, there was a commission, Maryland Business Tax Reform Commission, that was put into place to specifically look at combined reporting and other tax issues. The commission's final report said, quote, enacting combined reporting would therefore solve a problem that no longer exists while making the tax code more difficult to administer and comply with. It would result in a shift of the tax burden, substantial in some cases, among industry and among taxpayers, resulting in winners and losers. The second commission that was addressed was the Maryland Economic Development and Business Climate Commission, which is the Augustine Commission. And that commission, again, said, quote, to the General Assembly leadership, do not adopt combined reporting and indicate clearly the intent not to do so, end quote. And just to add to it, for many years, the General Assembly has considered whether to impose combined reporting in Maryland. This debate causes uncertainty and sends a negative message to businesses considering expansion in or relocation to the state. In its effort to reform the corporate income tax and generate additional revenues, combined reporting can create revenue volatility and winners and losers among corporate taxpayers. Combined reporting can also lead to additional litigation from taxpayers and create additional administrative costs for both taxpayers and the state. So I wanted to just share that, as some of the top economists in the state and tax policy experts in the state have come together twice and recommended against this. So for those reasons, we would urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you so much. Any questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, this ends the hearing on HB 46.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Is Delegate Lewis with us? I did see him here.
A call from his daycare. He had to run to pick up his
Okay.
2-year-old. So
Okay.
I'm Henry Snurr, Delegate Lewis's Chief of Staff, and he's asked me to sub in for him.
Okay, so we will call House Bill 75, and I will call up Davion Percy, Troy LaMail Stovall, Kendrick Tillman, Michael Ogunsanya. I think that fills all the seats up front at this point. Okay, and whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. For the record, my name is Henry Snurr, Chief of Staff to Delegate Jazz Lewis. I'm here in strong support of HB 75 to create a business diversity incubator program within TEDCO. Under this program, grants will be available for small business development, marketing, business education curriculum, finance training, and business material for incubators who are fully equipped and trained to boost our MBEs across Maryland. Business incubators are organizations that help small businesses get off the ground through services like business management, education, marketing assistance, and networking opportunities. These services can determine whether a startup fails or becomes a lasting contributor to our local economy. The University of Albany conducted a study on the economic impact of incubators and found very positive results for those local economies, as over 84% of graduates of these programs remain local once they outgrow an incubator services. Incubators are dynamic, as individual firms can be specialized to focus in on specific fields and industry support businesses and startups that might need their assistance. Having this specialized support can mean that a startup has the ally and mentor that need to overcome many of the initial challenges that they might face, which only a person with specific experience in that field may know about. Receiving that specialized mentorship and support can make sure that business owners are put on a successful path and they can move forward through the initial stages of their business. HB 75 takes further action to ensure that we support incubators who are equipped to support Black-owned businesses and those that come from disenfranchised communities. As a state, we need to do more to improve the opportunities and chances of success for our MBEs. Supporting diverse business incubators will make sure that we do just that and support state sponsors. The state sponsors those organizations who are best ready and able to step in and provide the services that address the unique challenges of our MBEs. The resources that a business incubator can provide stands to supplement the supports that we provide in our state government so that we create an abundance of options for the unique challenges minority startups face when they are created. We continue to work with advocates, business incubators, DLS, and our Senate cross-file sponsor on potential amendments to HB 75, which we will provide to committee once we get them back. Thank you, and for the reasons I just gave, I urge a favorable report from the committee.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Greetings. My name is Troy Lamel Stovall. I humbly serve as the CEO of TEDCO, your economic engine for early stage technology investments. I stand here in support of House Bill 75. I want to thank Delegate Lewis for his tremendous support in making this and bringing us to this point. I just want to do two quick things. I want to read the mission statement for TEDCO. Enhance economic empowerment by fostering an inclusive and entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, identify, invest in, and help grow technology companies in Maryland. That mission statement is very much embodied into what House Bill 75 is about and how we identify what we need to do to identify and grow early stage technology companies led by people of color and women. But I want to leave you with some stats. When you look at statistics for venture capital across this country, less than 2% of those monies have gone to early stage companies founded by women and people of color. But over the last 3 years here at TEDCO, more than 50% of our almost 100 deals have been led by people of color or women, and more than 55% of the monies in those 50% of those deals have been led by people of color women. So we understand the need to bring more tools to bear, and this bill helps us give more tools to help that community. So thank you, and we stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Percy? Okay, just try turning it off and turning it back on. We can't turn the microphone here. Okay, well, just speak loudly. Thank you. Sir, would you like to go? You're going to have to just, I apologize, speak loudly. Our tech people are on the way. Thank you. Mr. Tillman? Thank you. Any questions from the committee for the panel? Yes, the vice chair, and then Delegate Patterson.
In the General Assembly that has this bill as a top priority for 2023 that you could mention? I didn't hear that in the testimony. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that was on the record.
Delegate Patterson.
Madam Chair, Mr. Percy, thank you, really all of you, for the panelists, for your testimony. I'm particularly interested in ways in which Southern Maryland or Charles County can be more engaged in either TEDCO or some of the tools that you cite in the toolbox. Certainly within our county, we have small businesses that are just starting up, as well as businesses that have been in place for a number of years. So if there is a way in which this information is shared with other parts of the state, I would certainly appreciate that information. It may not be just you, whoever feels most comfortable answering that question.
Yeah, I'll start. So within TEDCO, I've actually spent quite a bit of time in Southern Maryland, 4 weeks. We have a program in TEDCO called the Rural Business Innovation District, RBII. We have an individual assigned. We divide the state into 4 regions. We have an individual assigned to each of those regions. We have a young man in Southern Maryland. We're actually about to bring on another person in Southern Maryland here. And those individuals are there to connect that ecosystem, to connect the anchor institutions, to connect the economic development, to connect the counties, and then expose them to the opportunities. So we're doing quite a bit of work, in addition with MEDCO, about the work that's happening in Southern Maryland around autonomous vehicles, and working with the Smart Center down there, how to activate the Smart Center as well. And so those are the types of activities we're doing. But this would be another tool that we would bring to the table, folks in Southern Maryland and across the state.
Thank you. If you're able to share that information, I would appreciate it. Again.
Any further questions from the committee for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. Next, we'll call Tracy Malone, Jarrell Cephas, Marone Abraham, and Trey Hayes, and Colby Smith. And I believe the microphones are working now. If there is a Maurice Alexander, you can come up. Okay, whoever wants to begin, go ahead.
I'll start.
Okay, thank you.
Greetings, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. I want to thank our sponsors for the bill, House Bill 75, Delegate Jazz Lewis, and our cross-sponsor, Antonio Hayes on the Senate side. I am Colby Smith, founder and chairman of Black Steel Incorporated, and member of the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce. We are a physical and cybersecurity company that does training programs and operates a testing center offering many certifications, employment placement tests, as well as Baltimore City's only GED testing center. As a child, I sat in the back of the courtroom of my father, the Honorable Paul A. Smith Sr., as he handled thousands of cases in the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. You see a lot there. I look at the Business Diversity Incubator Bill from a slightly different lens than merely an equity bill, which it is. I see it as a way to help lower recidivism as well. We have the ability for company and job creation, and in my view, crime and poverty are birds of a feather that flock together. With the Business Diversity Incubator Bill, we have an opportunity to include our socially and economically disadvantaged populations and underserved communities in the technology ecosystem of Maryland and make her better for it. We all know the statistics in regards to inclusion, and my colleagues have explained some to you very eloquently. I would, though, like to thank Troy Lamel Stovall and TEDCO for joining us in support of this historic piece of legislation and commend them on helping usher in a new era of inclusion with regards to Maryland's technology investments. We've gathered over 100 letters of support from community members, which we are happy to supply to the committee. As important as the greater Baltimore region is to us, we recognize that a project like this represents more than just the Baltimore area. It represents job opportunities, business opportunities, and we are in favor of a favorable report for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Greetings to distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee and to Madam Atterbury. My name is DeAndre Hayes. I'm honored to serve as Senator Ron Watson's Legislative Director representing the people of the 23rd District. I'm here today to support House Bill 75 that would provide grants to nonprofit organizations and establish business incubators for a more diverse and equitable tech landscape in the great state of Maryland. I'm the founder of GreenPage LLC, a platform that will enable Marylanders and people across the country to discover Black-owned businesses and spend their money at these storefronts. My company is in its fledgling state and has been in development for a little over a year. While our launch is closer than ever, I can only imagine where we would be today with something like the Business Diversity Program outlined in House Bill 75 to mentor the development of our business and guide us to funding that could kickstart our dream. This story unfortunately is not unique to GreenPage. According to Crunchbase, Black founders raised a measly $180 million in funding at the tail end of 2022, down considerably from the $590 million raised at the start of the year, even further from the $4.7 billion raised in 2021. This trend is grim. In total, Black founders received only $2 billion in venture capital funds in 2022, a mere fraction of the groundbreaking $160 billion raised in total in 2022. According to a report by Deloitte, nearly 8 out of 10 venture capitalist investment partners in 2020 were white, 15 Asian, and just 3% Black. This was in 2020, where the numbers were much more favorable. In the third quarter of last year, Black founders represented just 0.43% of nearly $43 billion funded by venture capitalists. This is a huge gap in the venture capital industry where diversity is a unicorn, equality does not exist, and equity seems out of reach. House Bill 75 is an essential step to closing this gap and rebounding from the downward trend of funding for Black-owned firms. Maryland can be a leader in paving the way for a more equitable tech industry where Black faces can be seen, can thrive, and can innovate. For these reasons and more, I urge favorable report on House Bill 75.
Thank you. Sir?
First, I'd like to thank Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and the entire Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to speak today. Good afternoon. My name is Maurice Alexander, founder of Assume Talent Agency. For nearly a decade, I have been a resident of District 40. Also, I was born and raised in Southeast Washington, D.C., which is literally down the street from Oxford, Maryland. And I say this to say as I always consider Maryland my home. and I'm in favor for this passing of this bill. Because through this funding, I plan on creating a construction incubator. Build Back Better.
Can that mic get a little bit closer to you?
There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I plan on creating a construction incubator, Build Back Better, where myself and my business partners who have decades of expertise in multiple fields of construction will train individuals in construction and how to run and start a business. Not only will this incubator give employment and business opportunities to individuals in socioeconomic disadvantaged communities, but also restore, rebuild, and create in those communities, such as restoring abandoned buildings and homes, creating community centers, parks, and also grocery stores in areas that are labeled food deserts. In closing, this bill is a bold move and potential for growth and opportunity for so many, and I ask that you submit a favorable report in the name of equity, in the name of progress, in the name for a better Maryland. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good afternoon. I want to thank Chair Honorable Delegate Vanessa Atterbury, Vice Chair, and entire Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tracy Malone, and I stand in agreement with the Diversity Incubator Bill. I am currently a small business founder of Eddie B Productions that started to bring joy to others in spite of tragedy. My baby brother was murdered 9 years ago, and he was a person that gave back to the Sandtown Winchester community in many ways. God showed me women gathering together in places, so I started in January of 2022 with 13 small business women owners from Baltimore gathering together to support other venues and churches every month. Since we have now collaborated with over 46 small business owners from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Harford County, Howard County, Montgomery County, and all throughout Maryland that come together to showcase our products and services monthly. We also create and cultivate events for children to have a safe environment full of fun. We have been able to help 11 venues, 3 churches, and over 30 families with limited funding. With the Diversity Incubator, we can help many more. We are in need of support to help others create their businesses and teach them how to do it effectively. Eddie B Productions is a business that's turning tragedy into triumph. This bill will directly help in many ways, positive ways, for small businesses such as myself. I ask that you vote in favor of this bill as well. Thank you for this time.
Thank you. Can you, flip-flop with someone, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Maron Abraham, and I want to thank the chair, Vanessa Atterbury, and Honorable Ways and Means Committee for giving me the time to speak today. My name, again, Maron Abraham, and I'm an owner of an outpatient mental health facility here in Baltimore City for the past 13 years. And what I found is that there is a need, and unfortunately, without the support of a bill like this, we can't build these children up to become productive citizens of Baltimore City or the state of Maryland as a whole. As of today, there are only 2 traditionally Black hospitals available, which is one, Howard University in my hometown of Washington, D.C., that was founded in 1862, and Riverside Hospital in Houston, Texas, which was founded in 1925. Neither one of those are in Baltimore City, and it is needed. My office is on Bologna, and up and down Bologna Avenue and Greenmount, you will see people standing in line waiting for any help whatsoever. Whether they be homeless, uninsured, anything like that, we're the ones that help them. I want to help push these kids to doing better, to rebuilding Baltimore City and the state of Maryland better than what it is right now. Without the funding, without this bill, I don't know how else we can do it. As a person that's not from Baltimore and still trying to help Baltimore, I can't do it on my own. And this bill is too important to just let pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for any member of this panel? Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel. So I'm trying to frame my question because I was just having this conversation last night with probably a person that would be interested in investing in what you all do. And one of the things that they talked about was that they know that their company has a need for more diverse hires. and that they were trying to figure out what is the pathway for them to not only provide outreach to younger people in terms of, just general support services, but also with the explicit goal of them coming into the finance industry, coming into the tech industry. So I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit more about the connection between the diversity incubator and this bill specifically, and what it means for more tangible apprenticeship, training, internship opportunities, experience for young people. If you could just kind of make that connection for us a little bit clearer, because I'm sure it is, but I would like to know how you all see it happening.
Perspective, my company, Black Steel Incorporated, runs training and testing programs, and cybersecurity, Amazon Web Services, Web3, we do all kinds of training programs, and that's my main focus before I even got into incubation. So I'm very much with you, and that's one of the things that Dr. Rodney Sampson said, which is at our event in support of the bill, was that it's just important for the talent and a training pipeline for the talent as there is for the incubators to exist themselves, and I agree with them. So I'm very much engaged in that already, and am in favor of having it expanded.
And then just specifically with this program, would it help support some funding for bringing on young people? Is that
most definitely.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Funding part problem is, as a mental health provider, we hire interns to come work for us in the mental health field, in the medical field, whether it's phlebotomy or testing for substance abuse, illicit drugs, anything like that. We have, in the past 13 years, have taken on students from University of Maryland to help them get the credits they need in order for them to move forward. And if they want to, they can, after graduation, come and work for us.
Got it.
But again, it's the funding that's the problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. I'm going to call again Jarrell Cephas, and is David Smith here? Okay, please come forward.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the Chair, Honorable Delegate Vanessa Atterbury, and the entire Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is David Smith. I am submitting this testimony to request your support for House Bill 75. I would like to thank Delegate Jazz Lewis for sponsoring this bill. I represent one half of a digital barber school multimedia incubator ahead of the game. As a master barber that has served over 3 decades within the beauty barbering industry, partnered with my brother who was a media professional with 2 decades experience in Baltimore's local broadcast market, we would respectfully request your support for House Bill 75. We have created a digital barbering school multimedia incubator that will produce more businesses in the form of mobile barbershops, synced with marketing production teams that will assist in the growth and proliferation of these businesses within underserved communities. This process functions as follows. Our incubator will create licensed barbers with the intent to open and operate their own barbershop establishments equipped with its own marketing production team. Barber students and future media business owners collaborate to produce marketing content. Future media business owners will regularly produce segments that will be included in an ongoing web series that highlights barbers in various lifestyles and creates content for various social media platforms. Our incubator will create skilled media business owners that will eventually form production teams that will produce marketing and media content for the consumption of a wide viewing audience. This historic legislation will be utilized to make Maryland business creation more equitable, competitive, and up-to-date with modern enterprise standards and protocols. These diversity incubators will create new businesses and investments in local communities in the state of Maryland. Therefore, we, my brother and I, as well as others in attendance here today, ask you to vote yes in support of House Bill 75.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 75. Now calling Delegate Rogers, House Bill 15. And if you, Daniel Ficus, Jeffrey Buttle, Jason Spiegel, and Thomas Jaworski could come up. I think that will fill the initial seats. You'll have Delegate whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the Mighty Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Mike Rogers, Legislative District 32. I respectfully request a favorable report of House Bill 15. This bill will increase from $15,000 to $20,000 the amount of subtraction modification under the Maryland income tax for individuals who are at least 55 years of age for retirement income received as a result of an individual's military service or attributable to the individual's employment as a correctional officer, a law enforcement officer, or fire, rescue, or emergency services personnel. Expanding the subtraction modification will make Maryland a more desirable place to live for military, fire, rescue, emergency services, and public safety retirees. It will also encourage retirees to remain in Maryland after age 55 as they begin to contemplate life after completely leaving the workforce. 38 states have fully exempted military retirement income from taxation, which positions all of those states as potentially more desirable retirement locations in Maryland. Expanding the income tax subtraction not only benefits Maryland retired veterans and first responders, it also benefits the state. The spending by this group of retirees benefits local businesses, and their knowledge and expertise benefits prospective employers and communities. I respectfully request a favorable report for House Bill 15.
Thank you. Daniel Ficus.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Daniel Ficus. I'm a 35-year veteran retiree from Baltimore City Police Department, past president of the Baltimore City Fraternal Order of Police, and sit on the Board of Governors of the Baltimore Retired Police Benevolent Association. Baltimore City FOP has approximately 4,200 members. Our Retiree Association, 1,600 members. And the Maryland State FOP has approximately 14,000 members, and we support HB 15. 2017, I testified favorably for HB 100. That was the Hometown Heroes. That afforded $15,000 subtraction modification to the retired pensions, and that it would not reduce valued resources, but maintain and generate revenues by stemming the exodus of our retired officers going to non-tax states. Over the past 6 years, I followed our retirees in Baltimore City. Residing out of state in 2017, we had 28%, 2019, 24%, 20, 21%, 21, 26%, 22, 28%. Most of those were residing in Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, our surrounding states. Residing residing in non-tax pension states. In 2017, it was 71%. As of last year, that had increased to 88%. Since HB 100, there has been a decrease in our migration of our retired officers, but as you've seen in the last 2 years, that has changed. The question why, and I've asked a number of our retirees, and that was the increase of the out-of-state was basically a siren, I say, the siren song of Florida. At this point, there was some of the reasons were inflation, restrictions of the pandemic, unemployment,
Could you
unemployment
just-
in here,
could you
and
wrap
then
up?
also employment opportunities. With that, I will have to ask for a favorable report on HB 15.
Thank you, Mr. Buttle.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Jeff Buttle, President of the Professional Firefighters of Maryland. Organization represents about 10,000 active and retired firefighters and paramedics that proudly serve across the state of Maryland. I'm going to be short in my remarks. I know the day is getting long here for the number of bills this committee has to hear. This bill has been before this committee before, so most members should be familiar with it. On the public safety portion of it, it does two simple things. It phases in over 2 years an increase from 15,000 to 17,500, and then in year two increases the income subtraction modification from $17,500 to $20,000. Our members proudly serve across the state of Maryland, sometimes for 25, 30-year careers, and many of them want to stay here and continue to reside in the state of Maryland, but they're finding that not necessarily the southern states. I think the people that want to move there are going to probably go there anyway, but there's a lot of our border states, such as Pennsylvania and Delaware, who just simply offer better tax advantages, and we find that our retirees are moving there instead of staying in this great state of Maryland. So I'd encourage the committee to strongly consider passing this legislation this year and to give it a favorable report. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Jason Spiegel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Jason Spiegel, President of the Maryland Military Coalition, which represents over 150,000 veterans and military families statewide. Since Maryland last updated its partial exemption in 2018, 23 states have fully exempted military retirement pay. 3 of the 4 states adjoining Maryland fully exempt military retirement pay or exempt more than Maryland does. As the governor stated yesterday in his State of the State speech, exempting military retirement pay incentivizes military retirees to live and work in Maryland. A 2019 Towson University study for the General Assembly determined that pension taxation is a critical factor when deciding where to live and work after leaving the service. Most service members are in their early to mid-40s when they retire. They will work in the civilian economy for around 25 years in second careers that are fully taxable. Military retirees have expertise in healthcare, cyber, IT, and research, and often have security clearances. It is not economically feasible for Maryland employers to fill these positions with applicants who do not have the required clearance or experience, and if people with the clearance and experience are not available, the jobs are not filled. Due to the expansion in remote work, military retirees can work for a Maryland employer while living in a bordering state that does not tax their pensions, or work at the other end of the country and work via the internet. We eagerly await the governor's Keep Our Heroes Home Act and the inclusion of $33 million in the budget to further exempt military retirement pay from state taxation. We thank Delegate Rogers for his bill and urge a favorable report with an amendment to remove the age restriction and fully exempt retirement pay.
Thank you. David Dragix?
Madam Chair, Atterbury, members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Dave Dragix, a retired Army Colonel and Legislative Director of the Maryland Military Coalition. My focus today is on the fiscal note for HB 15. Exhibit 1 of that note shows the effect of increasing the exemption of military retired pay on state and local revenues negatively affects them by $9.65 million in FY24 and by $11.3 million by FY28. We find no underlying assumptions in the note as to the number of military retirees claiming the exemption in each of the 5 years projected to support those estimates. Federal data shows that the number of military retirees in the state has been declining since 2019, partially due to them leaving Maryland. As such, we question the validity of these estimates. The exhibit also does not reflect or overlooks the positive effect of the additional dollars that would flow into the other state tax revenues and the Maryland GDP, offsetting any decrease as a result of the higher exemption. This significant point was made in a study commissioned by the General Assembly in 2018 and is further reinforced by the fact that our state ranks as number 8 in defense control contract spending, number 8 in the number of defense personnel, number 5 in defense personnel payroll, and number 7 in defense spending as a percent of the state's GDP. So as a result of these discrepancies, we believe the assumptions for the state local revenues in the fiscal note are not an accurate representation of the fiscal and economic consequences of HB 15 and do not provide this committee with all necessary information to decide on this bill. We support HB 15 with an amendment to exempt 100% of military retired income with no age restrictions, either all at once or with a 3-year phase-in, and we thank retired Army Colonel Delegate Mike Rogers for not only his service but also his leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this initial panel? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Rogers and the panel for this information. And I want to acknowledge the exemplary advocacy of U.S. Navy veteran Mike Moses, who's director of our Maryland Military Coalition, serving Charles, Prince George's counties in Washington, D.C. But we have heard and we continually support veterans and veterans initiatives. My question is, Delegate Rogers, last year I believe we looked at having tax credits for spouses. Can you give us an update in terms of whether or not that currently exists? Was it vetoed, or where are we with that?
Thank you, Delegate Patterson, for the question. I'm not familiar with any spouse exemptions for tax purposes. I do know that they are included in some of the compacts for licensing that I'm sure some of the committees in the General Assembly and on the House side will hear about.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call up your next group of folks. Delegate Rogers, Thomas Jaworski, Lynn Nash, David Weber, and Bryson Popham. And Mr. Jaworski, please begin.
Madam Chair and members of the House Ways and Means Committee, good afternoon. My name is Tom Jarkowski. I'm a retired Navy Rear Admiral who served on active duty for 31 years, including a couple years as an enlisted sailor. I've lived here in Annapolis for nearly 30 years now. When I retired from the Navy in 2000, my family and I remained in Maryland for one reason, and that was because I got a job here from a company who hired me because of my professional experiences that I gained in the Navy. Otherwise, my family and I could not have afforded to remain here if I wasn't able to start that second career. Quite simply, it was too expensive. My military retired pay alone would not have allowed us to remain in the state. Many of my colleagues chose a different direction. After serving in the area, they moved to another state, to states that fully exempted military retired pay from state income tax. There are currently 38 of those states that we've heard that fully exempt military retired pay. Maryland does not. Those 38 states understand two important things. One, retired military people have leadership and professional experience that companies and organizations seek. Second, by exempting their retired pay, state revenue will still be gained by taxing their civilian salary. The states that exempt military retired pay do so as a business decision. They know that attracting and retaining military people is a way to take advantage of their leadership, their technical, and their management skills. Attracting or retaining military retirees in Maryland would clearly help fill some of the 6,800 vacant state jobs and 20,000 open cybersecurity positions. I strongly urge the committee for a favorable vote on Governor Moore's bill with an amendment to exempt 100% of military retired pay with no age restrictions as 38 states already do, either all or at once by phasing the exemption in over 3 years. This will help attract and retain military personnel to the state and allow Maryland to benefit economically from a more attractive fiscal landscape.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir. And could you two flip-flop, and Ms. Nash, you can go ahead.
So I'm the director that represents the public health and NOAA here in the state. Public health, we have 12,000 people who live here. So for the record, my name is Captain Lynn Nash. I'm a 30-year retired service member and a nurse who believes that while HB 15 is an improvement over our current subtraction, it's less than our Keep Our Heroes Home Act announced by the governor, which would go to 25 and then 40,000, and less than our goal of 100% exemption. The reality is our younger retirees, especially healthcare professionals like U.S. public health officers, who are doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, and dentists. We have 12 categories, but they're leaving the state. Last year, 20 of my mentees, nurses, left. They went for greener pastures. They went to states that don't tax retirement, have a lower cost of living, and healthcare professionals actually get paid more in other states. As you know, we have a critical shortage in healthcare, especially nurses and behavioral health providers. Those officers who retire and leave service at that 40 to 55-year-old sweet spot still have 25 years. Their second careers here in Maryland would be fully taxable. By the way, they're usually 6 figures and above. And instead of providers aging out or leaving the profession, which is happening because of the pandemic, we're losing. Our healthcare occupancy numbers are rising. It's a vicious cycle. So I ask your committee to consider and amend Delegate Rogers' bill. And we ask that we go to the full exemption. This should be accomplished preferably this year before our healthcare system is irrevocably damaged. Thank you. I have numbers for you, Delegate Patterson, on spouses.
David Weber, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'll keep this brief. All my points have been gone over at this point. My name is David Weber. I served 5 years in the U.S. Army and now live here in Annapolis. I'm here to represent AARP Maryland's support for HB 15 income tax subtraction modification. AARP Maryland is one of the largest membership-based organizations in the state, encompassing over 850,000 members. We thank Delegate Rogers for sponsoring this bill. We believe that we must honor the service and acknowledge the sacrifice of our veterans. House Bill 15 does so by providing the greater economic viability for retired veterans and their dependents. We respectfully ask for a favorable report on House Bill 15.
Thank you. Mr. Popham.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Bryson Popham appearing before you today on behalf of the Army Alliance. The Army Alliance is a nonprofit association that exists for one purpose, and that is to support the mission of the Aberdeen Proving Ground, an Army base located and the center of Army research located in Harford County, Maryland. Should point out also that the defense ecosystem around APG is the largest employer in Northeast Maryland. My support is, first of all, for the bill as drafted. Page 2, line 25, very simply, I support that $20,000 figure that's in that line. I also support, as some of the witnesses have suggested, increasing that figure. I know that Governor Moore is supportive of that as well. This is the time to do it. I would urge you to do so. I have a question for you, and if you don't know the answer to this, I would suggest it's something you need to do as you consider this bill. And that is, do you know what the acronym BRAC means? Do you know what it stands for? Base Realignment and Closure is the acronym. And it is a program within the Department of Defense whereby they examine military installations around the country to decide which ones should close. That can happen here. I am not here to tell you that it's going to happen, but it can. The last round of BRAC occurred in 2005. We were winners. Fort Monmouth in New Jersey was closed. We got their missions at APG. but there's no guarantee that that will be the result in the future. And if you're watching what's happening on Capitol Hill, they're discussing all kinds of budget issues, including defense budget issues. Finally, I consider this and have appeared before you today with employers to present this as a jobs bill, because military retirees are absolutely essential to the continued health of the defense industry in this state. And for those reasons, Madam Chair, I'd respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 15.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this panel? Delegate Fair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is for the bill sponsor. We've heard a lot of this amendment, this age restriction amendment. I'm just curious if you have thoughts that you would like to add regarding those requests for an amendment.
So I'm going to defer to the committee's jurisprudence on this, but I will tell you that I am also signed on to the governor's bill, which removes that age restriction.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Griffith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the panel. Thank you, Delegate, for putting forth this bill. I know I've co-signed this bill. I support this very much. Couple of questions. So first, I grew up in Aberdeen. My first job was an APG. My foster dad worked behind the fence at APG, so it's a big part of my life. Right now, can you talk to some of our climate around veterans right now? Because right now we're losing a lot of veterans and business on some of these missions at Aberdeen to Huntsville, Alabama. We're kind of in a bidding war over not just jobs, but also talent. So this is my first two questions, but can you speak to how our military retirement environment is affecting our losses of talent to Huntsville, Alabama for our missions here in Maryland?
Respectfully, I would decline to answer that question, first of all, because I'm not qualified to, and I don't want to be in a position where I unfairly or otherwise criticize another military installation. Your question, however, is a very apt one, and it is certainly true that we are in competition with other places like Huntsville, and we have to do whatever we can to support our military installations. Not just Aberdeen, by the way. We have a number of them. For a small state, we are wealthy in the number of military installations we have, and we should support them. So thank you for the question, Delegate Griffith.
Absolutely. My final question is, so you'd mentioned multiple times that you would prefer to see a full removal of the retirement tax. Is that correct?
Those are my colleagues at the table. I'll take anything you give us as long as it's at least $20,000.
And just want to let you know that I do have a bill in that would do that. So hopefully some version of this can get done this year. So thank you very much.
Sounds like a good bill.
Griffith, if I could, specifically as it pertains to Aberdeen, just because of the geography of where Aberdeen is, there are a lot of people. I retired from Aberdeen in 2015. They live in Delaware, they live in New Jersey, they live in Pennsylvania, and they commute because they have that choice. And as was stated earlier, when the Department of Defense looks at its mission, it does have choices, and some of those things and some of those capabilities are able to be relocated.
Any more questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you all. Is Kevin Canale still here with us? Okay, he was signed up to testify as unfavorable, but he couldn't hang in there. So that concludes the testimony on House Bill 15. Delegate Palakovich-Carr, House Bill 148.
Again, for the record, Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr here to present House Bill 148. More than 40 years ago, our state created our Enterprise Zone program, and it was a program created with very good intentions to give tax credits to businesses that moved into or expanded in economically distressed areas, and to give income tax credits to employers that created new jobs in these communities. Fast forward to today, and the Enterprise Zone program is one of the most expensive business tax credits in our state, and it's not working as intended. The program has been the subject of repeated evaluations by our Department of Legislative Services, and simply put, DLS has said, get rid of it or fix it. And if you'd like to see a copy of that DLS evaluation, it is linked to both in the fiscal note for this bill as well as was uploaded with my testimony in your floor system. The DLS evaluation concluded that the program criteria are, quote, poorly designed and limit the program's effectiveness, end quote. They found that the enterprise zone tax credits are, quote, not effective in creating employment opportunities for enterprise zone residents, end quote. And repeated program evaluations show that we are throwing money at areas that aren't even economically distressed. These recommendations are largely similar to DLS's recommendations that were issued back in 2014. And that's because besides the minor reforms we passed last session through this committee, the enterprise zone program really has not been changed substantively in years. We are all here to be good stewards of taxpayer money. And that's why I get a little bit worked up about us spending $54 million a year on a program that's not working as intended. There's so many other things that we could be spending this money on, and I'm sure we all have our own personal priorities for how we would love to invest that money. But instead, we've allowed the inertia of this program to carry it forward for 40 years, while the costs have grown rapidly year over year, and there are no statutory restraints on future costs. So the reform legislation before you is the outcome of an informal summer study that was requested by the Revenue Subcommittee back in the 2021 session. That work group consisted of representatives of counties, municipalities, local economic development offices, the Department of Commerce, and members of this committee. And our collective work led to compromise legislation, which I introduced last session, and part of which was enacted last session. The remainder of that compromise legislation is the bill before you. So first, the bill would ensure that the enterprise zone program is targeted to economically distressed areas, as the program has always intended. DLS's evaluations have found that a disproportionate amount of money goes to the least distressed communities or even non-distressed areas, and data provided by the Department of Commerce show that half the acreage currently in enterprise zones is not economically distressed. This bill focuses our state's limited resources on the communities most in need. The bill also puts financial guardrails on the program. Nearly all economic development programs in Maryland have a cap on the annual cost. If you look just at the tax credits that this committee has jurisdiction over, we have caps on the biotechnology tax credit, cybersecurity, film production, research and development, job creation, and more jobs for Marylanders, but not this program. It's an outlier. We don't have unlimited state resources, so we need to put a reasonable cap on program costs. The legislation also would cap tax credits on a per company basis. This is how nearly all other states handle their enterprise zone tax credits. Currently, most businesses receive a fairly modest tax credit, a median of about $19,000 a year, but a tiny number of property owners are driving the cost of the program upwards. Nearly half of the cost of the total program is being driven by just 21 properties out of the hundreds that participate. 21 properties account for half the cost of a $54 million program. Implementing a tax credit cap will help small businesses by spreading out the program's funds among more businesses while maintaining the status quo for 95% of recipients. We'll note that I'm expecting a sponsor amendment on that section of the bill. I'm working with SSTAT on it. Notably, none of these proposed changes will impact existing enterprise zones or existing tax credit recipients. Rather, the reforms are all prospective. So in sum, DLS says the enterprise zone program isn't working as intended. We're spending a ton of money, most of which is going to the biggest companies and to non-distressed areas, and we keep writing a blank check for this program year after year. It is beyond time to make some reasonable reforms while allowing the program to continue. And I'm sorry that was a little long, but I'll note I don't have any witnesses, so thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Delegate Buckle.
Thank you. So I appreciate some of the concerns about why use the enterprise zone tax credits in places that are no longer economically disadvantaged. But wouldn't that be the sounder way to do this? I mean, the bill also talks about in 2031, we're going to eliminate the program. We're going to strip the secretary's ability to designate new areas, which may in fact be economically disadvantaged. Wouldn't it be a cleaner way to get to what I assume to be part of the goal here, to simply say, hey, if you're in an area that's no longer viewed as economically disadvantaged, you're out. We take that out of the enterprise zone and leave it at that. Would that work?
Look, I would support that, and part of this bill is trying to more narrowly target where future zones and expansions get drawn. Right now, kind of anything goes as long as part of the zone qualifies for the program, and this bill says you'd actually need to limit that to census tracts that in and of themselves individually qualify.
Right,
So I mean, I
there's
think if we can find a way, I'm open to some other solutions here. If we can find a way to really
Yeah.
more target this.
I mean, I'm just concerned. I mean, it seems to be going to gut the whole program. And I looked, what's provided in the report. I know you've read the report many times. I've looked at it a few times. The evaluation, the 4 largest counties by acreage that uses this, or jurisdictions. The largest is Harford County, followed by Baltimore City, followed by Prince George's County, followed by Baltimore County. Does that sound about right? I mean, they're the four places that have the most in terms of total acreage of these zones.
That's probably right.
Okay. I mean, because, we always talk about Baltimore City, being a special target for these types of programs. Prince George's County has, some areas that are, that aren't. Baltimore County definitely has some need for urban redevelopment in some blighted areas. And then you get down to places like my home county, which has 8,000 acres, which I can tell you, I'm pretty sure the entire county counts as an economically disadvantaged county. Not every neighborhood, obviously, but on a county basis. So I just don't want to see the program gutted to get to perhaps an intelligent goal of let's limit it to places where it really would be most effective. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just say, my intention here is not to gut the program, and you pointed out in particular the sunset provision. I think a lot of people get nervous about that, but as you well know, Delegate Buckle, it really has been the work of this committee over the last several years to ensure that every tax credit coming through our hands included a sunset date. And I purposely picked a very long sunset date. In fact, 8 years I think is probably longer than any other tax credit that we added a sunset date to in the last several sessions. So really was trying to preserve the program going forward while trying to make some reasonable reforms.
Any other questions for Delegate Plakovich-Carr? Yeah, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was reading some of the testimony that we got, the opposition, as far as, especially from Washington County. And there were a couple that were from the city of Hagerstown and very much opposed to this because they've had a lot of investment from real estate and businesses that have come. Would it be your fear that, especially for areas like that need the growth and development, would that drive away the businesses like they're saying in these opposition letters?
So I would just point out that the bill is only prospective. Hagerstown's enterprise zone would continue even if we passed this legislation. It doesn't make any changes to their existing zone or to any of the credits that the businesses that are currently receiving credits would receive. And also because of grandfathering language we included in the bill, even if a business moved into that zone or any other zone in the next several years, they would still get all of the full benefits as the program currently exists. They would not be subject to the provisions of the bill. This really is only for newly designated zones going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Delegate Plakovich-Carr? Okay, seeing none, you two gentlemen have been super patient. Let's give them a round of applause, folks. A lot of folks, there were some other folks, they couldn't hang in there. We do have a couple people virtually, so, okay, they might be in the waiting room, but we'll let both of you go ahead first.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Chuck Connor, and I'm here today on behalf of Security Land Development Company, LP. Enterprise zones have been a critical part of many of the jurisdictions represented here in this room, creating businesses, creating jobs, and creating opportunities where there were none. The ability to draw new businesses to the state is critically important as we venture into the next decade, and many of the distressed locations around the state rely on these enterprise zones to generate the opportunities that make a difference. The bill as written would make it extremely difficult to draw new zones, but it would also make it extremely difficult to expand and create zones after the termination date of the program. At my request, I have my colleague Chris Mudd here today to speak more in depth about some of the implications of the program for some of the ancillary parts of the program that have really made a tremendous difference for jurisdictions like Baltimore County and Baltimore City. Closing the doors on these possibilities closes the door on revitalization, jobs, and opportunities that really will make a difference for years to come. And that's why we respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 148.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, for your time, for the opportunity to be here, and certainly for the applause as we approached. It's very kind. My name's Christopher Mudd. I'm an attorney at Venable LLP with Chuck. And I'm here also representing Security Land and Development Company LP in opposition to this bill. I submitted written testimony regarding statewide business development impacts that would occur if this legislation were to be adopted, but I wanted to testify today to give you a little bit more of a specific example of the importance of the Enterprise Zone program for my client, or our client. Our client owns a decades-old office building on Security Boulevard, constructed in the late 1960s, that for years has been occupied by the Social Security Administration. The SSA's lease is winding up, the building is nearly vacant, and re-tenanting an antiquated building like this in a post-pandemic environment is virtually impossible. So redevelopment is imperative. And the property happens to be right across I-695 from Security Square Mall, which has also had its share of occupancy and vibrancy troubles over the years. In fact, that property and the area around it has become a major source of major focus of the county and the state for redevelopment of that area. And the county and the state should continue to make available every single tool in the toolbox to ensure the successfulness of that effort. My client has been looking at various redevelopment opportunities and has targeted the intensely competitive data center market. In this region, Maryland property owners seem to continue to lose out to our neighboring jurisdictions like Virginia when they're trying to place data centers in this state. The importance of the Enterprise Zone program for luring a data center is in the availability of the BG&E SEED program, which facilitates partial offset of the significant expenditure necessary to enhance the electric infrastructure that serves data centers. A prerequisite for obtaining the SEED program funding for new infrastructure is to be located within an enterprise zone. So the inability to attract data center users would cause a loss of job opportunities as well as personal property tax revenue that would be generated by those types of uses. And for all these reasons, as well as my written testimony, I ask for an unfavorable report on the bill.
Thank you. Are there any questions for these two gentlemen? Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you both for being here and for your endurance. I guess I just want to understand sort of the nature of the opposition and you know, to the sponsor's point around the intent of trying to refocus this tax credit program to its stated purpose, and really focusing on areas that are in fact economically distressed. I guess is it your opinion that it should be broader and we shouldn't be limiting it to areas that are economically distressed, or do you have a suggestion of a better way to focus it on those distressed areas?
Sure, if you don't mind. So I think the problem is there are a few things. We think that this bill as written really sends mixed messages, and it's difficult to discern whether or not the enterprise zone would be available on a particular piece of property. If you have a property owner or an investor from outside the state who might be wanting to invest here, and talking to the brokerage community, this is one of the largest economic development tools that enables the state of Maryland to lure someone from going to a place like Pennsylvania, or Virginia, or West Virginia, or Delaware. And so they look at this, they see that this program is available, and they want to make sure that it's going to be available. I know there was discussion about the fact that it's not affecting anything that's in place right now, for example, Hagerstown, but the shelf life on these is only 10 years. So when 10 years go by, you need to recertify again. So as you continue to chip away at this program, which I think has been attempted for several straight years now, it's just concerning that this bill or this program, which has been very effective, at least from a business development standpoint, would go away, and there'd be nothing to replace it. So I don't know that we're necessarily opposed to changes, to comprehensive look at it. In fact, I think that the report that was done last summer, or after last session, I should say, called for more of a study, a comprehensive look. We have a brand new administration here, and it's our position that we think we should take a comprehensive look instead of just sort of band-aiding pieces on the way, on the way to this goal.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We will move to, is Jonathan Horowitz with us? No? Okay, he is not here. Douglas Reeser? Okay, we can bring him in. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Reeser, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you on House Bill 148. My name is Doug Reeser. I'm the Business Development Specialist with the City of Hagerstown. Developers, investors, and businesses make decisions based on incentives as they compare Maryland to other states when selecting a site. Capping of property taxes, limiting state income tax credits for businesses, and sunsetting this important tool for economic development in 2031 cannot be the answer for an open for business Maryland. Offered the following examples of businesses utilizing the enterprise zone that would otherwise not have landed in the state for your consideration. Tractor Supply conducted a multi-state search 3 years ago to potentially move their Mid-Atlantic distribution center from Hagerstown. Ultimately, the enterprise zone was robust enough to retain the business and allow for investment of $51 million, retaining 429 jobs and adding 208 jobs within the state. Fourth Point Development developed 1.6 million square feet of industrial space and invested $169 million into four buildings, attracting national tenants of Amazon and Herbalife, providing over 600 jobs to the state. This was a national developer's first time developing in the state and had previously shied away from Maryland. In the words of Brent Miles, Chief Marketing Officer with North Point, business goes where business is welcome. Johnson Development Associates is under construction of 1.7 million square feet of industrial. The investment is expected to bring $130 million of investment and potentially create up to 1,000 jobs. MCB Real Estate, a Baltimore, Maryland-based developer, is set to create 1.9 million square feet of industrial. This project is bringing $175 million in capital investment and potential for up to 1,500 jobs. These examples, in excess of $525 million in capital investment, 1,200 jobs created or retained, and the potential for up to 2,500 jobs, were a result of the enterprise zone. Hagerstown is uniquely positioned to compete routinely with neighboring states of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia. For this, we're putting an unfavorable report in for House Bill 148. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Next is Mr. Aaron Tomachiro with us virtually. Yes. Whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman Atterbury and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Aaron Tomarchio. I'm the Executive Vice President with Trade Point Atlantic. We're the company redeveloping the 3,300-acre former Sparrows Point steel mill in southeastern Baltimore County. I'm here to tell you, in addition to the written testimony, that the enterprise zone is a critical program within the state of Maryland. I've seen it firsthand as one of the key incentive tools that have been able to allow us to attract over 36 world-class tenants and create over 12,000 jobs in a site that was an abandoned steel mill. This is a very important program that we think needs to remain. And we do understand some of the concerns, but I will say the DLS report that made a conclusion that suggested that there were no benefits to people living in communities in an enterprise zone are just not real. I have real data to suggest and show that the enterprise zone that we're in has created jobs for people in those communities and beyond. So I'd like to have that reexamined if possible. But I do think a more thorough review under this new administration would be appropriate with input from the real estate development and investment community. So I would appreciate this committee's unfavorable report on this bill until we've all had a time and seat at the table. I do not think the Legislative Services report does this program justice. And there's a longer term conversation to be had on how we can make it more effective and efficient. But it does work, and it has worked at Sparrows Point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 148 and Delegate Long, House Bill 67, last bill of the day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know it's a late hour. I'll keep it short and simple and sweet. I'm here to testify on HB 67. Sales and use tax alteration due to inflation. You have to forgive me, I'm tired. It's been a long day, long night too. This came about with inflation being out of control as it is right now. I think some people are reporting 6%, 7%. I believe it's probably higher than 9, in the range of 9. We see that what's happening each and every day with the inflation getting worse every day. The Fed's just up interest rates. They're trying to slow the economy down. In my district, people are struggling to make ends meet, and they're struggling to put food on the table. And what actually brought this out to me to do something about, we're paying sales tax on inflated prices, so the state of Maryland's actually getting more income or getting more revenue from it. I know that we need to do something because people are struggling, especially in my district. I'm sure many other districts here. And this is based on a CPI. Wait a minute, my glasses. Like I said, yeah, CPI. If it's 6% or above, then the sales tax would go down to 5%. And the reason why we base it on that, because in these times of need, when we have this type of inflation, we need to help our taxpayers out any way we can, especially with the prices of food. I mean, a dozen eggs, I think it's probably up to $7, $8 a dozen. I think they're even talking about instead of hiding eggs, they're going to hide potatoes this year. But anyway, thank you. Yeah. My wife says to me, we're not hiding no eggs, they're too expensive. You're going to hide potatoes this year. Oh, okay. I'm glad somebody gets my humor. My wife always tells me, your humor is very dry, nobody gets you. I says, I do.
thought it was funny. Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Long? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the testimony on House Bill 67, and that concludes the bill hearings for the Ways and Means Committee. Today, we will not be meeting again until Tuesday. Folks, please remember Monday is a pro forma session, so you do not have to be here in the evening. Goodbye.